What kind of madness builds a city on water? No solid ground, no bedrock, just mud, tides, and stubborn faith. Yet somehow, Venice didn't sink, it rose. For over 1,000 years, it has floated against all odds, balanced on millions of buried wooden piles, surviving floods, storms, and time itself. Tonight, we'll drift through the quiet genius that keeps this impossible city alive. So if you love calm stories of ancient engineering and human defiance wrapped in beauty, settle in and subscribe to Boring History. There are cities that seem born from ambition, built upon solid earth, with straight roads and proud walls. And then there is Venice, a place that feels less constructed than conjured. If you stand on one of its bridges at dawn, when the air is cool and the water still carries the taste of salt from the Adriatic, you can almost sense how fragile it all is. The sound of footsteps echoing off wet stone, the slow sigh of gondolas shifting in their moorings, the muted clatter of shutters opening to the morning light. Everything seems to float, suspended between water and sky. It's hard to believe that this city, shimmering and serene, was born not from confidence but from fear, not from conquest but from flight. Long before the marble palaces, before the bells of San Marco rang across the lagoon, this was just a wasteland of mud and mosquitoes. The Lagoon of Veneta, a shallow, treacherous tangle of salt marshes, shifting tides, and low islands barely above sea level. And yet, somehow, people decided to make it home. The story begins in the chaos that followed the fall of the Roman Empire. The northern plains of Italy, fertile, wealthy, and open, became easy prey for wave after wave of invaders. Goths, Huns, Lombards. Cities like Padua, Aquilea, and Altinum were burned and abandoned. Families fled with what little they could carry, a few possessions, perhaps a religious relic or two, and headed eastward, toward the marshes where the land dissolved into water. They weren't seeking a paradise, they were just trying to survive. The lagoon was inhospitable, damp, full of biting insects, and reeking of decay. But that was its gift. No army could march through mud. No horse could charge through saltwater shallows. The refugees realized that what was unlivable could also be unassailable. They built huts of reeds on the higher sandbanks, tethered boats between the shallows, and learned to read the rhythm of the tides. In those first years, the Venetian story wasn't about splendor, it was about endurance. No one could have looked at those muddy islets and imagined a city. The ground shifted beneath their feet. The water rose and fell with the moon. Yet slowly, necessity began to breed invention. The people who stayed learned how to anchor their huts, using long wooden poles driven deep into the clay. They discovered that beneath the mud lay a dense layer of compressed sediment, solid enough, if you reached it, to hold weight. Those poles, cut from alder oak and large trees from the mainland, would become the skeleton of the city to come. It's strange to think of Venice as a forest turned upside down, a city resting on a buried grove of wooden piles that never see the sun. But that's exactly what it is. Over time, these piles, deprived of oxygen, didn't rot. Instead, they hardened, mineralized by the salt water, turning into a kind of stone. Every church, every palace, every bridge rests on this hidden miracle, a forest preserved by mud. Imagine the courage, or perhaps the desperation, it took to believe this was possible. There were no engineers as we know them, no written manuals, just generations of trial and error. People noticed that certain spots held firm while others sank. They learned to lay wooden planks over clusters of piles, spreading the weight. Then build with lighter materials above brick and Istrian limestone, a brilliant white stone resistant to salt and time. And so, the first real buildings began to appear, clustered around a few stable islands: Torcello, Murano, Burano, and the Rivo Alto, or High Bank, which would one day become the heart of Venice itself. Here the early settlers built their first church, the Basilica of San Giacomo, in the 5th century, a small wooden structure that may have seemed laughable compared to the Roman basilicas of the mainland, but it marked something extraordinary: permanence in a place where nothing was meant to last. Centuries passed, and what began as survival slowly turned into identity. The Venetians grew different from the Italians on the mainland, more cautious, more cunning, more attuned to the moods of the sea. Their lives were ruled by tides, winds, and trade currents. They built boats that could glide through shallow waters and read stars that guided them beyond sight of land. The lagoon that once imprisoned them became their moat, their highway, their lifeblood. By the 9th century, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. While other cities rose and fell under the weight of war, Venice endured, not because it was stronger, but because it was untouchable. No enemy could siege a city without roads, and no flood could destroy a people who had learned to live with water rather than against it. Still, this defiance of nature came at a cost. Every inch of Venice had to be fought for, built, and maintained. The wooden piles needed constant renewal. The canals had to be dredged, and every foundation required delicate balancing. The lagoon itself, that shimmering expanse of silver water, stretching between the islands and the Adriatic, had to be managed like a living organism. Too much fresh water from rivers, and the lagoon would silt up. Too much salt water, and the islands would erode. So the Venetians, centuries before modern environmental engineering existed, learned to redirect rivers and control the inflow of the sea. They turned their fragile refuge into a carefully tuned system, not quite land, not quite sea, but something in between, something entirely their own. When you walk through Venice today, it's easy to forget this hidden machinery. The beauty of the place, the arches reflected in the canals, the soft decay of plaster walls, the glitter of gold mosaics inside St. Mark's, conceals the madness of its construction. Underneath, everything is engineered in defiance of gravity, erosion, and common sense. The Piazza San Marco, the heart of the city, was once a muddy field. The great basilica was built on a platform of timber driven into the lagoon's bed, supporting tons of marble, mosaics, and domes. The Doge's palace, that pink and white dream of Gothic lightness, stands on a foundation only a few feet thick, yet has endured earthquakes, fires, and floods. Every stone in Venice whispers the same quiet truth, that the impossible is sometimes just persistence disguised as beauty. There's an odd serenity to it all. Venice doesn't roar like other great cities, it murmurs. Its power was never built on conquest, but on adaptation. The people learned to bend with the water, to float with it, rather than fight it. Even their streets, the canals, are in constant motion, reflecting a city that has accepted impermanence as its foundation. The Campi open squares are slightly uneven, the houses lean just a little, and the reflections in the water ripple, as if the whole place is dreaming. And perhaps it is. Venice has always existed in that half-real state, part engineering, part illusion. Tourists arrive and think it's a museum, frozen in time, but it's actually in constant negotiation with the elements. Beneath the surface, pumps hum, barriers shift, and the old piles still bear the weight of centuries. To understand how improbable this is, imagine trying to build a skyscraper on a sponge. That's what the Venetians effectively did. They found stability in instability. They learned that water, which usually destroys, can also preserve. That wood, when deprived of air, can outlast stone. That a city doesn't need to conquer nature if it can learn to move with it. Every lesson in Venice's story runs counter to the logic of empire, and maybe that's why it survived so long. The Republic of Venice, La Serenissima, lasted over 1,000 years, longer than almost any other state in European history. And through all of that, it never forgot what made it possible, the quiet genius of its engineering, and the humility of its beginnings in the mud. There's something haunting about that origin, a city born of fear that became a symbol of beauty. It makes you wonder what those first refugees would think if they could see what their desperation had created. Would they recognize it? The grand basilicas, the marble palaces, the painted ceilings, all resting on the same swampy ground where their huts once stood. Maybe they'd smile, or maybe they'd shake their heads at the madness of it all. Because even now, after centuries of admiration, Venice remains absurd. It defies the rules of construction, the logic of geography, and the patience of engineers. And yet, when you stand on the Ponte di Rialto at sunset, watching the light turn the water to gold, it feels inevitable. As if this place was always meant to exist, waiting for someone mad enough to build it. The first chroniclers of Venice liked to tell a legend that it was founded at noon on the 25th of March, in the year 421, when the church of San Giacomo was consecrated. Maybe that's true, or maybe it's just a story invented later to give the city a proper birthday. But there's a deeper truth in the tale. It says that Venice wasn't born in conquest or ceremony, it was born in faith. Faith that a city could stand where no city should, that human will could make peace with water, that beauty could rise from fear, and that faith, more than any stone or pile, is what holds Venice together even now. When you watch the city from above, the way the canals curl like veins through its body, the way the light pools in courtyards and glides across the roofs, you see the strange harmony that emerged from chaos. Nothing in Venice was planned the way we plan cities today. It evolved, grew, adapted. Every mistake became part of its charm. Streets end in water. Doors open to canals. Towers lean. And yet, it works. There's no grid, no straight line, no perfect symmetry. Only a labyrinth of human ingenuity, finding balance in disorder. In that sense, Venice isn't just a city. It's a philosophy. One that says survival isn't about strength, but about flexibility. As centuries passed, the rest of the world began to see Venice not just as a city, but as a miracle, a floating jewel, a bridge between East and West. Its ships brought silk from China, spices from India, glass from Moreno, and ideas from everywhere. But beneath all the wealth and color, the true miracle remained the same, that this city continued to stand, supported by its invisible forest, breathing through its canals, defying the sea that both nourished and threatened it. Even today, with modern technology and endless maintenance, no one can quite explain why it still endures. Engineers study it, conservationists worry about it, but the answer always feels more poetic than scientific. It survives because it learned how to live with uncertainty. At night, when the crowds are gone and the lagoon reflects only the stars, Venice seems to exhale. The hum of boats fades, the tide whispers against the stones, and the city feels alive in a quiet, ancient way. You can almost imagine the first settlers listening to the same sound, wondering if their homes would last another season. They couldn't have known that what they built out of desperation would become one of humanity, the greatest works of art, or that centuries later people would still be trying to understand how it was possible. Maybe that's why Venice feels timeless. It's not just old, it's suspended between eras, between elements, between logic and dream. And so the story of Venice begins, not with triumph, but with fragility, a reminder that sometimes the most enduring creations are the ones that shouldn't exist at all. The city that rose from mud and fear became a place of light and beauty, and its survival remains one of history's quietest miracles. When you look at its reflection shimmering in the water, you realize you're re-seeing both the city and its ghost, the present and the past floating together. Venice has never been about perfection. It's about persistence, about the strange, stubborn human need to build, even when everything says it can't be done. And that, perhaps, is its real engineering marvel. Not the piles or the canals, but the courage to try. Beneath the calm green waters of Venice lies a secret world few ever think about, a hidden forest, silent and unseen, holding up an entire city. It's strange to imagine that something as heavy and magnificent as Venice, its marble churches, its bell towers, its endless palaces, stands not on solid rock, but on millions of buried wooden piles sunk deep into mud. The city's first and greatest illusion. What looks like stone and permanence is actually a fragile balancing act, a slow, careful negotiation with water and decay. Every step you take in Venice, every bridge you cross, every arch you admire, rests on a foundation so improbable it feels like alchemy. But that was the genius of the Venetians. They built stability out of instability, strength out of rot, and permanence out of things that should have perished long ago. The lagoon's secret foundation isn't just an engineering feat, it's the quiet, enduring heart of Venice itself. To understand why this was necessary, you have to picture what the Venetian lagoon really is. It's not a gentle, sandy shore, but a sprawling, shifting network of shallow basins, tidal flats, and muddy islands created over thousands of years, where the rivers of northern Italy meet the Adriatic Sea. The ground here is neither solid nor predictable. Beneath a few feet of water and silt lies a thick layer of clay, soft and saturated. Step on it and you sink. Build on it and it gives way. And yet, somehow, this was where the Venetians decided to construct their world. On most of the islands, there wasn't enough dry land to build even a cottage without it listing or sinking. So they had to learn to cheat gravity. Instead of looking for firm ground, which didn't exist, they invented a way to make their own. The secret began with trees. On the mainland, to the north and west, thick forests of alder, oak, larch, and poplar grew along the rivers and foothills. These trees became Venice's lifeline, From the very beginning, the builders of the lagoon understood that the only way to create stability was to drive countless wooden piles into the soft mud until they reached a denser, more compact layer below. Each pile acted like a slender column, transferring the weight of the buildings above through the soft upper silt and into the firmer clay beneath. Thousands upon thousands of them were needed, and that's no exaggeration. The church of Santa Maria della Salute alone stands on more than 1 million piles. Each one was driven by hand, using wooden mallets and iron caps, hammered rhythmically by teams of men who worked knee-deep in the muck. It was slow, brutal, back-breaking work, but there was no other way. The method was ingenious in its simplicity. The Venetians first cleared the surface of weeds and loose sediment, then cut the piles, usually about 4 meters long, and sharpened their tips. These were driven vertically into the mud in dense clusters, one after another, packed so tightly they almost fused together. Once a platform of piles was in place, horizontal beams and planks were laid across their tops, forming a flat surface. On this wooden raft, layers of stone and brick were built to distribute the load even further. Only after that could the masons begin the visible part of the structure, the walls, arches, and floors. What's remarkable is that the piles weren't driven down to rock. There was no bedrock within reach, but rather to a point where the compressed clay was strong enough to resist further compression. In essence, Venice floats, not on water, but on a dense cushion of mud reinforced by an artificial forest of timber. If this sounds temporary, it's because it should have been. Wood, especially when buried in wet soil, normally decays quickly. Yet here comes the second miracle of Venice, the chemistry of its own survival. You see, decay requires oxygen. In the lagoon's waterlogged mud, there isn't any. Once the piles were driven deep beneath the surface, they were sealed away from air, protected by the very environment that threatened to swallow them. Over time, the minerals in the brackish water seeped into the wood, slowly petrifying it. The alder, oak, and larch didn't rot. They hardened. Modern engineers who examined piles pulled from under centuries-old buildings have found them astonishingly intact, darkened, mineralized, but strong as stone. Venice, in a literal sense, rests on wood turned to stone by the slow alchemy of the sea. This invisible forest, preserved in darkness, has lasted longer than anyone could have imagined, and the Venetians understood it instinctively. They had no scientific terms for oxygen deprivation or mineral absorption, but they learned through observation. They noticed which timbers lasted, which rotted, which species resisted worms. They became masters of reading the life of the lagoon, of sensing what could endure within its strange chemistry. They harvested wood from distant alpine valleys, floated logs down rivers, and transported them across the lagoon by barge. Every log was precious, a literal pillar of their world. As Venice grew wealthier, its appetite for timber became enormous. Forests in Dalmatia, Istria, and even further afield were felled to feed its foundations. The Republic regulated forests carefully, knowing that every tree was a potential building block for the city's survival. Walking through Venice today, it's easy to forget this hidden labor. The elegant palaces along the Grand Canal, their facades gleaming in the afternoon light, seem effortless. But beneath each one lies the work of countless anonymous hands, the carpenters who cut and drove the piles, the laborers who leveled the platforms, the engineers who measured and tested the soil with primitive tools. Every building in Venice has two stories, one above water, one below. The upper story is visible, the art, the architecture, the ornament. The lower story is pure function, an unseen city of submerged timber, silently holding everything aloft. When the tide rises and the water laps at the stone steps, you're really looking at the edge of this hidden structure, the border between the visible and invisible worlds. The lagoon itself was both the challenge and the collaborator in this grand experiment. It gave Venice its protection, its trade routes, and its unique identity, but it also constantly tested the limits of human ingenuity. The piles had to withstand not just static weight, but movement, the subtle shifting of tides and the flexing of the soft ground below. Buildings in Venice don't sit still. They move, slowly, imperceptibly, with the rhythm of the water. Over centuries, some have tilted, others have cracked, but remarkably few have fallen. That's the genius of the system. It's not rigid but resilient. The timber foundations, though ancient, act almost like shock absorbers, distributing pressure evenly, adapting to small movements rather than resisting them. This flexibility, unplanned but fortuitous, may be one reason. Venice has survived countless minor earthquakes and centuries of subsidence without catastrophic collapse. Consider, for example, the Campanile of San Marco, the great bell tower that rises beside the basilica. When it collapsed in 1902, it wasn't the piles that failed, but the masonry above. The wooden foundations remained intact, exactly as they had been for centuries. The tower was rebuilt on the same piles, using the same ancient system, and still stands today. Proof that the lagoon's secret foundation works, even in the modern age. It's humbling to realize that something invented by refugees over 1,000 years ago, with no advanced tools or formal theory, continues to outperform some modern engineering. But the story of Venice's foundations isn't just technical, it's emotional. There's something profoundly human about the way the city clings to its fragile base. The people who built it knew they were working against nature, yet they refused to yield. They didn't tame the lagoon. They partnered with it, learned its moods, and found a kind of balance. They accepted impermanence and built anyway. And that philosophy, that coexistence with uncertainty, still defines Venice. Every time the tide rises and floods the Piazza San Marco, every time the water glints beneath a bridge, the city seems to whisper the same message. That endurance isn't about defying nature, but understanding it deeply enough to live with it. In recent centuries, engineers have studied Venice with awe. They've drilled cores into its foundations, analyzed the wood, measured the loads. What they've found is astonishing. Some piles beneath buildings from the 11th and 12th centuries remain so well preserved that their wood fibers are still distinguishable under a microscope. The alder, in particular, has proven almost immortal under these conditions. It's no wonder the ancients called it the tree that lives in water. Even the Romans used alder piles for bridge piers and harbor works, but nowhere was the practice taken to such extremes as in Venice. Here, it wasn't just a method, it was a way of life, repeated endlessly over centuries as the city expanded, repaired, and rebuilt itself. Each island in the lagoon had its own challenges. Some sat on firmer ground, others on pure silt. Builders developed localized techniques, shorter piles in one area, longer in another, different patterns depending on the soil's consistency. The result is that beneath Venice lies not a uniform structure but a patchwork, a mosaic of foundations, each slightly different, each adapted to its little piece of the lagoon. It's as if the city were grown rather than built, each root seeking its own place in the mud. Modern engineers marvel at this irregularity because it shouldn't work. But somehow it does, not perfectly, but gracefully, like a body held together by balance rather than symmetry. If you could drain the lagoon and walk beneath Venice, it would look like an ancient forest frozen in time. Millions of dark, waterlogged trunks, standing shoulder to shoulder, stretching as far as the eye could see. Each one is a testament to the sheer audacity of human will. We often think of cathedrals or castles as monuments to ambition, but Venice's greatest monument lies out of sight, in the quiet darkness under the water. It's a city supported not by conquest or empire, but by patience, by centuries of people hammering wood into mud and trusting that it would hold. The lagoon's secret foundation is also a reminder of how fragile this balance is. In the 20th century, when industries on the mainland began pumping groundwater from beneath Venice, the city started to sink faster. The delicate equilibrium that had lasted for centuries was disturbed. Engineers realized too late that the ancient system depended on the constant saturation of the soil. Once the piles were exposed to air, they began to dry and weaken. The lesson was clear. Venice survives only as long as its hidden forest stays drowned. That's why the modern city now works tirelessly to control its tides and protect its base. Projects like MOSE, the vast system of underwater barriers designed to block storm surges, are just the latest chapter in a story that began when the first settlers learned how to live with water instead of fighting it. Even now, as scientists monitor the city's slow sinking, the old foundations remain remarkably faithful. When divers examine them, they find not decay, but a strange, stony hardness, a transformation born of time and salt. You can hold a piece of it in your hand and feel both the wood and the stone it has become. A perfect symbol of Venice itself, something alive that has turned into art. There's poetry in that the city which seems so delicate, so ethereal, is literally built on transformation, on nature's own slow alchemy. When you walk along the Grand Canal and watch the palaces shimmering in the water, remember that what you're seeing is just the surface of a much deeper story. Beneath your feet, beneath the marble and mosaic, lies the hidden architecture that makes everything possible. It's as a foundation that isn't really a foundation at all, more like a pact between humans and the sea. Every wooden pile is a word in that silent contract. Every brick a promise to endure a little longer. And somehow, against every law of logic, that promise has held for over 1,000 years. Venice shouldn't stand. Every engineer knows it. Every geologist can prove it. And yet, there it is, still shimmering, still breathing, still refusing to sink. The secret of the lagoon isn't just its timber piles or its mineralized wood. It's the understanding that even the softest ground can bear the weight of dreams, if you're patient enough to learn its rhythm. The Venetians didn't conquer the lagoon. They listened to it. They built their city the way water moves, slowly, flexibly, with respect. That's why it still floats, when so many empires that once surrounded it have long since vanished. And that's the strange, quiet truth buried beneath the water, that Venice's greatest strength was never stone, or power, or wealth. It was humility, the willingness to build, not on solid ground, but on faith. Faith that wood would harden, mud would hold, and that the city could live in harmony with its impossible foundation. Down there, in the silent dark beneath the lagoon, that faith still stands, one timber at a time. If the wooden forest beneath Venice is its hidden skeleton, then the bricks and stones above water are its skin, the visible proof that something impossible can exist when human imagination meets necessity. When the first settlers had mastered the piles and the platforms, they faced a new challenge: how to build structures that could last, not just for a few years, but for centuries, in a city where everything seemed to float and shift. They quickly learned that conventional materials would fail. Stone, heavy and unforgiving, would sink or crack under the weight, and softer masonry would be devoured by the salt water and the changing tides. Out of this necessity, Venice developed its own language of construction, one that balanced beauty and strength, function and elegance, and above all, the delicate requirements of a city that was never meant to exist at all. From the earliest days, Venetians experimented with brick. It was lighter than stone, easier to mold, and when baked just right, could resist the damp, salty air of the lagoon. The bricks were typically small, rectangular, and fired in simple kilns, but their arrangement was anything but simple. Builders learned to stack them in herringbone patterns or reinforce them with horizontal and vertical timber beams to distribute the weight evenly over the piles below. These patterns weren't just decorative, they were functional, designed to prevent shifting or cracking as the wooden piles below subtly moved with the tides. Over time, the Venetians refined their methods, inventing arches, buttresses, and vaults that made even heavy stone buildings stable atop the floating foundations. Every brick was carefully chosen, every wall tested by generations of trial and error, until the city slowly rose above the water in a patchwork of carefully balanced structures. Yet bricks alone were not enough. Saltwater is unforgiving. Rain and tide, wind and sun, all conspire to erode surfaces over time. To protect the city's grandest facades, Venetians turned to Istrian stone, quarried from the rocky coasts of what is now Croatia. This pale, almost white limestone was dense, non-porous, and remarkably resistant to water and salt. It became the signature material of Venice's floating architecture, used for palaces, bridges, and monumental public buildings. Unlike marble, which would flake and crumble under constant exposure to moisture, Istrian stone absorbed the conditions of the lagoon and held fast, its bright color shimmering against the green water and the dark bricks behind it. In combination with brick, it allowed architects to craft buildings that appeared light and airy, with arches, balconies, and delicate cornices seemingly suspended above canals, yet grounded firmly on the hidden piles below. The beauty of Venice, its inimitable charm, is inseparable from these engineering decisions. Every Gothic palazzo, every Renaissance church, every corner shop perched above a canal reflects a balance between art and physics, between necessity and creativity. For example, consider the Chia d'Oro, or House of Gold, on the Grand Canal. Its facade is a lacework of stone tracery and pointed arches, delicate enough to look like it might shatter, yet utterly stable. That stability comes not just from clever weight distribution or timber platforms, but from the careful selection and placement of every brick and block of Istrian stone. The Venetians knew instinctively that lighter, well-supported walls could rise higher, open wider, and withstand the elements longer than massive, monolithic stone blocks. They invented their own architecture to suit the lagoon, a style dictated by necessity, refined by generations, and eventually admired by the world. But the artistry of Venice is not just in the choice of materials, it is in their combination and manipulation. Builders learned that by alternating brick and Istrian stone, by embedding arches and recesses, by shaping windows and doors to reduce stress on walls, they could create facades that were both elegant and durable. Even narrow streets and canals dictated design. Buildings had to be light so as not to collapse into water, but strong enough to withstand occasional flooding, storms, and the slow sinking of the city. It was a delicate compromise. The verticality of Venetian architecture, with its tall, narrow houses, was itself a response to spatial constraints and environmental pressures. By building upward rather than outward, Venetians minimized the footprint on unstable ground while maximizing living and storage space. A clever solution, dictated as much by physics as by imagination. Inside these structures, ingenuity continued. Floors were often built using layers of wood and brick to balance weight and prevent warping. Foundations were raised several feet above the highest tides, and walls thickened or thinned depending on the anticipated load. Even decorative elements were carefully calculated. Stone balconies had hidden supports. Plasterwork was reinforced, and every cornice and ledge was designed to shed water rather than trap it. In Venice, decoration was never frivolous. It was engineering in disguise. Ornate windows and arches, for instance, reduced weight while providing strength, turning the city's beauty into a structural asset. The very aesthetic of Venice, its lightness, its airiness, its delicate Gothic details, is inseparable from centuries of experimentation, adaptation, and careful observation of the lagoon's unique challenges. Venice's approach to architecture was also deeply pragmatic. The city did not have the mountains of marble or stone that other Italian cities possessed, nor could it easily import them in massive quantities. This scarcity encouraged innovation. Builders learned to stretch materials, to layer them cleverly, and to rely on lighter bricks wherever possible. They created a distinctive palette of red brick and pale stone, often accented with stucco or plaster, that has become iconic. They learned that certain bricks survived better in humid conditions, that some mortar resisted saltwater erosion better than others, and that stone facings could be reused or replaced as needed. Venice became a city that was continuously maintained and constantly adjusted, its architecture alive, growing, and evolving alongside its people and its environment. The canals themselves influenced design as much as any material. Buildings often leaned slightly over the water, their reflections creating a mirror image that doubles their visual height. Lower floors were typically constructed to withstand occasional flooding, sometimes with thicker walls, higher arches, and water-resistant finishes. Bridges, too, required their own engineering sensibility. They had to be light enough to span canals without heavy support, yet strong enough to endure foot traffic, tides, and occasional storms. The marriage of brick, stone, and timber allowed architects to achieve this delicate balance. Even the layout of doors and windows was calculated, both for aesthetics and for structural integrity, ensuring that walls could bear weight while admitting light, air, and views of the shimmering canals. One remarkable aspect of Venetian architecture is its adaptation to impermanence. Builders never assumed that structures would remain unchanged. Repairs, reinforcements, and modifications were built into the design from the beginning. Palaces were designed to be patched, facades could be replaced, and foundations could be reinforced as subsidence or flood damage occurred. This constant adaptation meant that Venice could survive centuries of environmental stress without catastrophic collapse. It also meant that the city was never static. It evolved organically, each generation of builders learning from the mistakes and successes of the previous one, continually refining their techniques in an ongoing conversation with the lagoon. Even the choice of Istrian stone reveals a kind of early environmental engineering. It wasn't just resistant to salt. It was heavy enough to anchor structures, but light enough not to overload the piles. Its color reflected sunlight, reducing heat absorption in the summer, and its density made it difficult for water to penetrate deeply. When combined with brick, timber, and plaster. It created a composite structure that worked with the environment rather than against it. This holistic approach, where material, design, and environment were inseparable, is a hallmark of Venice's genius. Unlike most cities, which adapt the environment to fit their architecture, Venice adapted its architecture to fit the environment. Every brick, every stone, every arch is a testament to that quiet, persistent ingenuity. Perhaps the most astonishing achievement is the longevity of these structures. Some palaces date back to the 14th century and still maintain their original facades, balconies, and arches. Despite centuries of flooding, storms, and subsidence, the materials, carefully chosen and maintained, have outlasted many other European cities built on solid ground. This is not luck. It is the result of meticulous observation, rigorous experimentation, and a profound understanding of how water interacts with wood, brick, and stone. The Venetians learned that survival depended on harmony with their environment, and they embedded that philosophy into every brick, every stone, and every arch. The beauty of Venice, therefore, is inseparable from its engineering. It is a city where art and science coexist seamlessly, where the aesthetic delight of Gothic arches or delicate tracery is a direct consequence of structural necessity. The visual poetry of the city, the way light plays on walls, the reflections in the canals, the airy facades emerges directly from centuries of careful experimentation and adaptation. Venice demonstrates that necessity can give birth to beauty, and that survival can be art. Walking through Venice today, it's easy to forget the layers of ingenuity beneath the surface. You see only the palaces, the arches, the bridges, the delicate marble balconies, and you marvel. But below, hidden in the murky depths of the canals, lies the silent scaffolding that makes it all possible. Every structure is a conversation between timber, brick, and stone, between builder and lagoon, between past and present. The city is alive, not just in its bustling streets and shimmering canals, but in its architecture, which continues to bear the weight of centuries while floating above a hidden forest of wooden piles. Even now, as modern engineers study Venice, they are astonished by the cleverness of its materials and design. The combination of brick and Istrian stone, the careful distribution of weight, the adaptation to shifting foundations, all of it was done without modern tools, without formal calculations, relying only on observation, experience, and an almost intuitive understanding of physics and environment. Venice, in this sense, is not just a city, it is a continuous experiment, a living laboratory of how humans can build in harmony with impossible conditions. And so, as you drift along the Grand Canal, watching the sunlight flicker on the pale stone of palaces, the red brick of houses, and the delicate arches that frame each doorway, remember that you are seeing the culmination of centuries of ingenuity. The visible beauty of Venice is inseparable from the hidden engineering that supports it, from the timber piles deep in the lagoon, to the bricks and stones that rise above the water. Every balcony, every arch, every facade, is a testament to the city's resilience, its adaptation, and its quiet genius. Venice doesn't just survive on water, it thrives, thanks to materials chosen with care, structures designed with foresight, and a philosophy that sees beauty and engineering as one and the same. Even after 1,000 years, the city still teaches lessons, that careful observation, thoughtful adaptation, and respect for natural forces can achieve the impossible, that art and engineering need not be separate, and that a city built on uncertainty can endure as long as every element, every brick, every stone, every timber is chosen with care and purpose. The palaces, churches, and bridges of Venice are not just monuments to human creativity. They are monuments to patience, intelligence, and a quiet determination to coexist with the environment rather than dominate it. And as the gondolas drift past, as the sun sets on the Grand Canal, it is possible to imagine the minds of those early builders, hammering and stacking, experimenting endlessly, and slowly, meticulously, giving rise to a city that floats, balances, and shines, a city born of necessity, sustained by ingenuity, and admired by the world. If Venice is a city that floats on wood, brick, and stone, then its canals are the veins that give it life. They are more than water-filled streets. They are the arteries through which the city breathes, moves, and survives. To walk along a Venetian canal is to witness a system of engineering born not from convenience or vanity, but from necessity, adaptation, and centuries of careful observation. The early settlers didn't have maps, blueprints, or hydraulic engineers. They had mud, tide, and instinct. They understood that a city built on shifting islands would need channels not just to transport goods and people, but to regulate water itself. And so they began carving a labyrinth of canals, each one a deliberate response to the pressures of the lagoon. These canals were engineered, maintained, and adapted over centuries, forming a network so intricate and precise that it could carry both life and commerce while keeping the city from sinking into its own foundations. The very first canals were likely no more than narrow, shallow channels dug between sandbanks and mudflats. The settlers needed paths to move boats, catch fish, and reach the mainland without traversing treacherous shallows. Over time, these channels were deepened, widened, and lined with embankments reinforced with wood and stone. The goal was not just navigation, but water management. Saltwater and freshwater flow differently. The tides rise and fall, rivers deposit silt, and storms can transform a calm lagoon into a churning hazard. Every canal had to balance these forces. If it was too shallow, it would silt up quickly. If too deep or wide, it could erode the banks or destabilize nearby buildings. Venice became a city in which every inch of water had to be measured, observed, and respected. The canals were alive, constantly changing, and the people learned to adapt to their rhythm. The Grand Canal, the main artery of the city, is perhaps the most famous example of this ingenuity. Its shape, resembling a reverse S, was dictated by the natural contours of the lagoon and the locations of stable islands. It was not artificially straightened or redirected for aesthetics, as in some modern cities. Rather, it followed the path of least resistance, balancing depth and width with the stability of the ground beneath. Buildings along its banks were constructed to lean slightly inward, countering the pressure of the water while maximizing usable space. Bridges were built with careful attention to arches and spans, allowing boats to pass underneath while maintaining structural integrity. Even the famous Rialto Bridge reflects this principle. Its elegant arch distributes weight efficiently over the foundations while allowing the canal to remain navigable. Every element of canal design, from the width to the embankments to the bridges, was simultaneously functional and aesthetic, a testament to the Venetians' ability to merge beauty with survival. Water flow was a constant concern. Saltwater from the Adriatic competes with fresh water from the rivers flowing into the lagoon, and tides rise and fall twice a day, sometimes by over a meter. Without careful planning, canals could stagnate, silt up, or flood the surrounding buildings. Early Venetians learned to manipulate water levels using gates, locks, and sluices, channeling excess water away from inhabited areas while allowing tidal exchange to keep the lagoon healthy. This balance was critical. If water stagnated, it would breed disease and accelerate decay in wooden foundations. If water flowed too strongly, it could undermine banks or destabilize structures. The canals were a delicate equilibrium, a constant negotiation between human needs and the forces of nature, and the Venetians became masters of this dialogue. One of the most remarkable aspects of Venetian canal engineering is how it adapts to subsidence. The city is slowly sinking, a process that has been ongoing for centuries, exacerbated in the 20th century by groundwater extraction. Yet the canals continue to function because they are designed to move with the city. Embankments are reinforced with Istrian stone and wooden pilings, and canal depths are adjusted to account for changing levels. This ongoing maintenance is not optional. It is essential for survival. Generations of gondoliers, masons, and laborers have worked continuously to dredge silt, repair banks, and monitor water flow. Venice's canals are not static. They are a living system, maintained by human vigilance and the subtle observation of natural patterns. Even smaller canals, the narrow rios, are feats of engineering in miniature. They must accommodate boats, allow drainage, and withstand occasional flooding, all within tight urban confines. Buildings are constructed directly on canal edges, meaning their foundations are in constant contact with water. Masons and carpenters devised clever techniques to reinforce these foundations, embedding planks and stones to absorb the pressures of shifting mud and moving water. In many cases, the lower floors of buildings are built with water-resistant brick and stone, designed to endure frequent contact with water without collapsing. Doors and stairways often open directly onto the canals, blurring the line between land and water and emphasizing how deeply Venice's inhabitants were forced to integrate their architecture with the lagoon itself. Canal width, depth, and curvature were not arbitrary. Venetians discovered that narrow, winding canals reduced the speed of tidal currents, preventing erosion and giving boats better control. Wider canals could serve as main arteries for trade, carrying heavy loads of goods into the heart of the city. Each canal was tailored to its purpose, whether transport, drainage, or protection. The interplay between canals and buildings was critical. A miscalculated channel could undermine nearby foundations, while carefully engineered flows ensured that even during high tides, water would disperse evenly, avoiding concentrated pressure on piles and walls. In this sense, Venice's waterways were both streets and lifelines, simultaneously guiding commerce and sustaining the very ground on which the city rested. Bridges further illustrate the ingenuity of canal engineering. Early bridges were simple wooden structures, easily replaced if damaged by floods or rot. As the city grew, more permanent stone bridges were built, but they retained the principles of flexibility and adaptation. Arches were constructed to distribute weight evenly. Foundations were carefully tied into the wooden piles below, and spans were adjusted to accommodate the ebb and flow of boats. Each bridge represents a balance between permanence and impermanence, solid enough to last centuries, yet designed to move with the city's foundations and resist the constant pressures of water. Even today, Venice's bridges are a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge, a dialogue between form, function, and the lagoon. Canals also shaped Venetian society. Because water was the primary means of transport, neighborhoods developed along their banks, and streets evolved as extensions of the waterways. Markets, homes, workshops, and churches were oriented toward canals rather than traditional streets. Gondolas, barges, and smaller boats became extensions of daily life, and the rhythm of movement on water dictated social and economic patterns. In effect, the canals became invisible infrastructure, shaping everything from commerce to culture. They were not merely utilitarian. They were the veins of a living, breathing city, integrating every aspect of life with the environment. The interaction between canals and tides also led to innovations in flood management. Venice is famous for its acqua alta, the periodic flooding caused by high tides and storms. Early engineers learned to anticipate these events, reinforcing banks, raising walkways, and developing strategies to redirect water away from critical areas. Sluices and small gates were installed to manage flows, and canals were dredged regularly to maintain proper depth. Even temporary flooding became part of the city's design. Ground floors were often uninhabitable, built with water-resistant materials, and bridges and raised platforms allowed pedestrians to move safely above the tide. In this way, Venetians didn't fight the water. They integrated it into their urban planning, creating a city that functioned with, rather than against, its environment. Maintenance was continuous. Workers called barcaroli and scariolante patrolled the canals, checking embankments, clearing debris, and shoring up weakened banks. Canal silting had to be managed constantly. If left unchecked, sediment could alter water flow, destabilize foundations, and disrupt navigation. Wooden pilings embedded along canal edges were inspected and replaced as needed, often with precision dating back centuries. The city's survival depended on this vigilance, a continuous human effort that complemented the genius of the original design. Venice is not a static monument. It is a dynamic system, alive in the interaction between its builders, inhabitants, and the lagoon. Even the layout of the canals demonstrates a profound understanding of hydraulics. Long before the science existed in formal terms, water had to flow freely, avoid stagnation, and distribute pressure evenly to prevent erosion. Some canals follow natural depressions in the lagoon, while others were excavated to connect islands and improve circulation. The city's engineers intuitively understood the balance between inflow and outflow, between tides and river deposits, and between sediment and structural stability. This knowledge was passed down through generations, a combination of oral tradition, apprenticeship, and trial and error. Venice's waterways are therefore both infrastructure and pedagogy, teaching anyone who studies them about resilience, observation, and adaptation. Beyond function, canals shaped the aesthetic of Venice. The reflections of buildings in water, the subtle curves of canals echoing through neighborhoods, and the interplay of light and movement are inseparable from their engineering. The city's beauty is a direct consequence of its waterways. Narrow canals create intimacy, wide canals create grandeur, and the constant motion of water animates the architecture above. Bridges, facades, and walkways were all designed in consideration of their reflections and interactions with the canals, creating a visual harmony that feels effortless but is rooted in centuries of observation and adaptation. Venice's canals were also the city's defenses. Shallow lagoons, narrow channels, and winding waterways slowed invaders and protected the city from traditional siege tactics. The same engineering that allowed commerce and daily life also served as natural fortification. Ships could move quickly where the defenders knew the depths, while attackers, unfamiliar with the shifting waters, would struggle. In this sense, every canal served multiple purposes: transportation, flood management, commerce, aesthetics, and defense. It was a multifunctional system that emerged organically from necessity, refined over centuries into a city that could survive and thrive in an environment that would destroy any ordinary settlement. The longevity of Venice's canals is remarkable. Despite centuries of storms, floods, and the constant decay of wood and stone, they continued to function as the lifeblood of the city. Ongoing dredging, reinforcement, and maintenance ensure that waterways remain navigable and that the foundations beneath continue to support the buildings above. Even today, engineers study these ancient waterways for insights into sustainable urban design, flood management, and adaptive construction. Venice's canals are a living archive of knowledge, preserved in the rhythms of tides, the alignment of bridges, and the flow of water through centuries-old channels. In essence, Venice's canals are both art and science, natural and human, ephemeral and enduring. They embody the city's genius, the ability to transform limitation into opportunity, instability into structure, and necessity into beauty. Walking along them, drifting in a gondola, or gazing at the reflection of palaces in the water, it's easy to forget that every inch of this network is engineered with precision and care. The canals are a reminder that Venice did not merely survive. It thrived by embracing the very elements that threatened it, by integrating architecture, materials, and water into a single, living system. And so, as the gondolas glide silently under arches, as the soft lapping of water echoes against facades, and as the light of the lagoon dances across bricks and Istrian stone, it becomes clear that Venice's lifeblood is not just its visible streets and palaces, but the intricate network of canals beneath it all. They carry water, commerce, and life. They preserve the foundations. They shape the city's identity and its aesthetic, and they are a testament to centuries of human observation, adaptation, and quiet genius, the secret that allows a city built on mud, tide, and timber to survive, thrive, and enchant the world even today. If Venice is defined by its canals, then the gondolas and bridges that traverse them are the very expression of the city's movement, its pulse, and its rhythm. They are not mere vessels or crossings. They are an essential part of a delicate, centuries-old system that transforms water into streets, transport into culture, and human ingenuity into art. To imagine Venice without its gondolas is to imagine the city without its heartbeat. For these slender black boats glide not merely on water, but across history, tradition, and the very foundations of survival. And to cross a Venetian canal without thinking of the bridges is to miss the engineering feats that bind a city built on mud and timber into a coherent, functioning whole. The movement of Venice, its flow, its traffic, its very lifeblood, is a miracle of observation, adaptation, and elegant practicality, harmonized with the tide, the canals, and the floating city itself. Gondolas are the most iconic symbols of Venice, but their significance extends far beyond charm or tourism. They were, and remain, primary transportation, narrow, shallow, and lightweight. These boats are uniquely adapted to the city's intricate canals. Their design is a masterpiece of balance and subtle asymmetry, engineered to counteract the uneven pressure of a single oar. A gondolier stands at the stern, pushing against the water with a single or mounted off-center, and yet the boat glides straight, effortlessly, almost magically. This asymmetry is deliberate. It compensates for the oar's force, ensuring that the boat travels efficiently without drifting sideways. Every gondola is a study in hydrodynamics, born not from theory, but from centuries of trial, observation, and refinement. Its black lacquer, elegant curve, and ferro, the distinctive ornamental iron prow, are not merely decorative, but serve to distribute weight, cut through water, and balance the vessel. The gondola is Venice made tangible, flexible, beautiful, and perfectly adapted to the city's liquid streets. The history of the gondola reveals the interplay of necessity and culture. Early Venetian boats were broader, less refined, designed to transport goods across canals, not tourists in comfort. As the city grew and the canals narrowed, boats had to become slimmer and lighter, able to navigate tight turns, shallow waters, and sudden tidal surges. Gondolas evolved in response, their form dictated by the city's constraints. Each curve, each plank, and each oarlock reflects centuries of practical problem-solving. The ferro, with its 6 prongs, symbolizes Venice's sestieri, its 6 districts, and adds stability to the boat. Even its weight distribution was carefully considered to allow the gondola to carry passengers without sinking or tipping. In this way, a gondola is not just a boat. It is a floating architectural achievement, a bridge between tradition, engineering, and everyday life. Bridges, in turn, are the other half of this movement system. The countless stone and wooden crossings that span Venice's canals are as vital as the boats themselves. Early bridges were simple wooden planks or arches, easy to replace if damaged by water, ice, or tide. But as Venice prospered, stone bridges replaced wood, designed to endure centuries while accommodating both pedestrians and the fluctuating lagoon. Each bridge had to distribute its own weight, as well as the forces of tides, wind, and even minor earthquakes, while remaining light enough not to overwhelm the wooden piles below. The Rialto, the Accademia, and countless smaller arch bridges are masterpieces of geometry, balance, and intuition, all designed to accommodate movement of water, of people, of life, while maintaining structural integrity. Venice's bridges, like its gondolas, are a perfect synthesis of function and art. The synchronization of boats and bridges required foresight. Canals had to be wide enough and deep enough for boats to pass under arches, but narrow enough to preserve structural stability. Turns had to be gentle to allow navigation, yet precise to maximize space along canal edges for buildings and markets. Gondoliers had to coordinate their movement to avoid collisions in narrow canals, a dance perfected over generations. The city's layout, therefore, is a choreography of water, wood, and stone, where movement dictates placement and placement dictates movement. Even today, traffic on the canals follows a complex set of unwritten rules, inherited from centuries of experience and observation. Venice is a city where movement is as carefully engineered as the foundations beneath it, and every crossing, every glide, is a testament to that meticulous planning. Bridges also shape social and economic life. They connect neighborhoods, allow markets to flourish, and create sightlines that define the city's aesthetic. Some bridges, like the Rialto, became centers of commerce, where shops, stalls, and pedestrians converge. Others remain quiet, residential, or utilitarian, linking small alleys and private homes. Their designs respond to these roles. Commercial bridges might be wider, sturdier, and more ornamented. Residential bridges narrow, intimate, and practical. All share one characteristic: the need to withstand water, weight, and time. Foundations are embedded into timber piles, abutments reinforced with Istrian stone, arches carefully shaped to distribute pressure. In every detail, bridges are a solution to the same problem the city faces everywhere: how to move safely, efficiently, and elegantly atop a shifting, watery foundation. The interaction between gondolas and bridges demonstrates the genius of Venetian design. A gondolier approaches a bridge and instinctively knows the timing, the tilt, and the speed required to pass beneath the arch without damage. In narrow canals, boats pass each other with inches to spare, turning, adjusting, and compensating for the current and weight. The canals, bridges, and boats form an interconnected system, each element dependent on the others. Remove one, or miscalculate its dimensions, and the city's delicate choreography could falter. Venice's genius is that this system evolved over centuries through observation, trial and error, and shared knowledge, without formal engineering texts or scientific measurement. It works, and has worked, because humans learned to read the rhythms of water, weight, and movement, and designed every element to harmonize with them. Even the gondoliers themselves are part of the engineering system. Their skill, balance, and timing are crucial. A gondola can carry multiple passengers, cargo, or supplies, but its stability depends on the oar, the distribution of weight, and the subtle tilt of the boat. Gondoliers learn from apprenticeships lasting years, absorbing the nuances of currents, tides, and canal widths. They adjust their movements instinctively, reading the water's subtle signals. In effect, each gondolier becomes a living component of Venice's hydraulic and transportation engineering. Without their skill, even perfectly designed boats would be at risk in the twisting, shallow, and sometimes treacherous canals. Movement in Venice is not limited to boats and bridges. The city itself seems to glide as buildings slowly settle on their piles. The lagoon subtly shifts with tides, and foundations compress under centuries of weight. The city moves in imperceptible increments, millimeters at a time, yet the canals, gondolas, and bridges accommodate this shift naturally. Walls lean slightly, streets curve unpredictably, and bridges flex under pressure. Venice is alive not because of static construction, but because of dynamic interaction, and every element of movement, human, architectural, or natural, is part of a self-correcting, adaptive system. The city floats, but it also flows. Even temporary or seasonal movement required innovation. High tides, known as acqua alta, inundate streets and canals periodically. Bridges, stairs, and gondolas must adapt. Some buildings have water-resistant ground floors. Canals are dredged to maintain depth. Boats adjust cargo and balance to compensate for changing water levels. The Venetians developed an intimate understanding of seasonal cycles, and movement became a rhythm synchronized with tides, moon phases, and weather. Every canal crossing, every gondola ride, was a negotiation with nature, a practice refined over generations until the city could move in concert with its environment. Gondolas also reflect social and economic hierarchies. In the past, they were used not only for transport but for display. Noble families commissioned ornate gondolas, their curved prows and gilded decorations signaling wealth and status. Yet even the most decorative gondola had to obey the same physical rules. It had to balance on narrow canals, glide under arches, and resist the force of tides. Social function and engineering converged seamlessly, illustrating how Venice integrated human culture, aesthetics, and survival. Boats, bridges, and canals were not merely practical. They were expressions of identity, crafted to serve multiple roles at once. The distribution of bridges and canals also influenced trade and movement patterns. Merchants and artisans relied on water routes for delivery, access, and storage. Narrower canals were often reserved for smaller craft or local use, while wider channels carried heavier loads and connected to the Grand Canal. Movement patterns dictated not only commerce but urban development, shaping neighborhoods, markets, and residential zones. The city grew along water as much as on land, reinforcing the idea that mobility of goods, people, and ideas was engineered into the very fabric of Venice. Even today, Venice's system of movement remains astonishingly effective. Despite centuries of change, urban growth, and the pressures of modern tourism, gondolas glide through canals with centuries-old precision, and bridges accommodate foot traffic and floods with the same principles used by builders hundreds of years ago. Engineers studying Venice marvel at the efficiency and elegance of this self-organizing system. It is a city where transportation, architecture, and water management converge into a living, moving organism. Every step on a bridge, every glide of a gondola, every reflection on the canal's surface is a part of that organism, a testament to a civilization that mastered the art of movement in water, mud, and time. Venice's movement system is also a story of endurance. Wooden boats and bridges decay, foundations settle, canals silt, and tides rise unpredictably. Yet careful maintenance, observation, and continuous adaptation have preserved this system for centuries. Gondoliers repair their boats with traditional techniques. Masons restore bridges and embankments using Istrian stone and timber. Canal dredging continues to ensure proper flow. Movement is both the challenge and the solution. The city survives by remaining in motion, literally and figuratively, and every element, from pile to bridge to gondola, contributes to this ongoing dance. In essence, Venice moves as a single organism. Canals guide traffic, gondolas carry life, and bridges connect it all into a coherent pattern. Movement is engineered through centuries of observation, experimentation, and intimate knowledge of water, weight, and rhythm. The city floats because it moves, and it survives because it adapts. And every glide of a gondola, every crossing of a bridge, and every ebb of a canal is part of the engineering genius that makes Venice possible. And so, as you drift through the narrow canals, passing beneath low arches, watching gondoliers balance on a single oar, and glancing at bridges that have borne centuries of footsteps, it becomes clear that Venice's true marvel is movement itself. It is not just the beauty of the city, or the palaces, or the sunlight on water. It is the orchestrated, flowing, living rhythm that allows a city built on mud, wood, and stone to endure. Against tides, time, and gravity, Venice does not merely exist, it moves, and in that movement lies the secret of its survival, its elegance, and its eternal fascination with the world. If Venice teaches us anything, it is that life on water is never simple. For all the beauty of the canals, the elegance of gondolas, and the grace of bridges, the city exists in constant negotiation with the elements. Venice floats not by accident but by centuries of adaptation to a fragile, shifting environment, and nowhere is this more evident than in the struggle to manage floods and tides. The lagoon that sustains the city is both lifeline and threat. Twice daily, the tides rise and fall, moving saltwater into canals, washing over embankments, and testing the resilience of foundations built atop piles of timber. Over centuries, Venetians have learned not just to endure floods, but to predict, adapt, and even exploit them, turning a natural hazard into a driving force behind urban innovation, culture, and survival. Floods, or acqua alta as they are known locally, are part of the rhythm of Venetian life. High tides occur naturally, a result of gravitational forces exerted by the moon and sun on the Adriatic Sea, combined with wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, and river inputs. But for Venice, even a moderate tide is more than a background phenomenon. It is a persistent reminder that the city is not built on solid ground, but on mud, sand, and timber, and that every building, street, and canal is vulnerable to water's unrelenting force. Early Venetians quickly realized that survival depended on careful observation of these patterns. They learned to read the sky, to track lunar cycles, and to understand seasonal shifts in wind and rain. This intimate knowledge allowed them to anticipate high water events and plan construction, transportation, and daily life around them. The city became a living calendar of tides, where architecture, canals, and social routines were synchronized with the rise and fall of water. Managing floods required more than observation. It demanded ingenious engineering solutions. The foundations of every building, already resting on wooden piles, had to withstand the pressure of water seeping in from all directions. Ground floors were often left unfinished, built with water-resistant brick or stone that could endure repeated inundation without collapsing. Doors and stairways were elevated, thresholds reinforced, and walls coated with materials designed to repel moisture. Over time, Venetian builders developed a sophisticated understanding of hydrostatics. They knew how water pressure interacted with walls, how currents could erode foundations, and how tides could undermine embankments if left unchecked. In essence, each building became a microcosm of hydraulic engineering, designed not only to stand but to breathe and flex with the water around it. The canals themselves were integral to flood management. Each one acted as both conduit and buffer, channeling excess water away from populated areas and distributing it across the lagoon. Dredging became essential. Sediment carried by rivers and tides had to be removed regularly to maintain depth, prevent stagnation, and reduce the risk of overflow. Wooden reinforcements along canal edges absorbed shocks from tides and waves, while stone embankments provided stability and reflected water back into designated channels. This network of canals was far more than a transportation system. It was a dynamic, adaptive mechanism for regulating water, a precursor to modern flood control, created entirely through centuries of observation, trial, and incremental improvement. Yet Venice's greatest challenge was not ordinary tides, but extreme events. Storm surges, heavy rainfall, and seasonal floods could combine with high tides to inundate streets, squares, and buildings. St. Mark's Square, the heart of Venice, often becomes a shallow lagoon during such events, its iconic mosaic submerged beneath water. Early Venetians developed temporary walkways and raised platforms to navigate these floods, improvising pathways above the water. They reinforced bridges and embankments, creating a city that could flex in response to water without breaking. Over time, flood response became ritualized. Carpenters, masons, and boatmen would coordinate, patching weak points, guiding boats, and ensuring safe passage for citizens. Floods were disruptive, yet they were also catalysts for innovation, teaching Venetians the value of redundancy, resilience, and constant vigilance. Seasonal changes intensified the challenges. Winter brought low atmospheric pressure and strong winds from the north, pushing seawater into the lagoon. Spring tides in March and September could coincide with storms, creating unusually high water levels. Rivers feeding into the lagoon deposited sediment, raising the floor of shallow areas and altering water flow. Venice was forced to adapt continually, adjusting canal depth, embankment height, and building thresholds in response to these shifts. This adaptability became a hallmark of the city. It was not a static place but a living system, capable of adjusting to changing conditions without losing its integrity. Floods were not merely obstacles. They were integral to the city's rhythms, dictating construction, transport, and daily routines for generations. The human response to flooding extended beyond engineering. Social structures, economic practices, and urban life were all shaped by water's presence. Merchants timed deliveries to avoid high tides. Markets were built along slightly elevated embankments, and households developed systems to protect valuables from water damage. Boats became extensions of homes, allowing residents to transport goods even when streets were submerged. Gondoliers learned to navigate deeper or faster waters, adjusting their oars and paths to compensate for strong currents. Life itself was a form of hydraulic engineering. Every decision, from trade to travel to construction, took into account the potential for inundation. The city did not fight the water. It moved with it, learned from it, and integrated it into its culture. Some of Venice's most remarkable adaptations were architectural. Churches, palaces, and civic buildings were constructed with raised floors, arches, and water-resistant materials. Foundations were reinforced, and structures were designed to absorb or redirect water rather than resist it outright. Even decorative elements were functional. Ornate stairways and balconies allowed residents to navigate rising water, while carefully placed stone ledges protected walls from erosion. The city's aesthetic and its survival were inseparable. Beauty in Venice often emerged from necessity. The delicate tracery of a Gothic window, the elegance of a raised balcony, or the curvature of a bridge was often a response to floods, tides, and water pressure, demonstrating how engineering and artistry evolved hand in hand. Venetians also experimented with water management systems beyond simple canals and foundations. Gates, sluices, and small embankments were installed to control flow, prevent stagnation, and divert excess water during storms. Some neighborhoods developed localized drainage systems, where excess water could be channeled safely into less populated areas. Even temporary wooden walkways served dual purposes, providing mobility during floods and reinforcing embankments against erosion. Every solution was iterative, tested over decades or centuries, improved, and then passed on to the next generation. Venice's survival depended not on a single invention, but on continuous adaptation, observation, and communal knowledge. Despite these measures, floods remained an ever-present threat. High water events could destroy cellars, erode foundations, and damage frescoes or mosaics. Wooden piles could rot, bricks could crumble, and embankments could give way. Yet the city endured because Venetians approached floods pragmatically. They understood that complete control over nature was impossible. Instead, they sought resilience and flexibility. Buildings, streets, and canals were designed not to resist water entirely, but to coexist with it. This philosophy of adaptation rather than domination became a defining feature of Venetian life and architecture. Survival depended on humility, observation, and incremental improvement. Modern Venice continues this tradition. The MOS project, a series of mobile barriers designed to protect the city from exceptionally high tides, is a contemporary manifestation of centuries of flood management knowledge. Even now, engineers rely on historical data, sediment studies, and centuries of observation to predict water behavior. The city's survival is still an ongoing challenge, echoing the lessons learned by countless generations of Venetians who first recognized that water is not just a medium of life, but are forced to negotiate, respect, and adapt to continually. Floods also shaped social memory and culture. Stories of inundation, heroic gondoliers, and community responses are embedded in Venetian identity. Seasonal flooding influenced festivals, public ceremonies, and urban planning. Citizens learned to live with uncertainty, integrating contingency into every aspect of daily life. Venice's relationship with water became not merely practical but philosophical. The city is a testament to endurance, humility, and the integration of human life with a volatile natural environment. The struggle to keep Venice afloat illustrates a profound truth. Engineering is inseparable from observation, culture, and continuous adaptation. Timber piles, Istrian stone, canals, bridges, and gondolas all work in concert to mitigate the effects of floods. Yet none is sufficient alone. The city survives because generations of Venetians have learned to read tides, respond to storms, and adjust structures, transportation, and daily life to the water's rhythm. Floods are not merely obstacles, they are teachers, shaping the city's architecture, engineering, and society. Even small floods leave their mark. Saltwater slowly seeps into brick and stone, eroding mortar, softening foundations, and threatening structural stability. The city must repair constantly, using the same materials and techniques that have worked for centuries. Wood is replaced, stone reinforced, canals dredged. Every high water event is a rehearsal, a reminder of the delicate balance that sustains Venice. The city is in perpetual negotiation with water, and its survival is a testament to human ingenuity, persistence, and patience. Ultimately, Venice floats because it has learned to live with floods, not against them. Its canals channel excess water, its buildings absorb it, its bridges span it, and its people adapt around it. Floods and tides are not anomalies. They are part of the city's natural system, integrated into architecture, transport, culture, and identity. This holistic understanding of water, weather, foundations, and human activity is what allows Venice to endure centuries of environmental pressure, economic change, and social evolution. Walking through a flooded street, gliding past submerged squares in a gondola, or watching water ripple against palace walls, one realizes that Venice's charm and fragility are inseparable. Every high tide is a reminder of the city's precarious balance, and every successful adaptation a triumph of observation, engineering, and human patience. Venice does not merely exist on water, it survives with water, in a continuous dance of adaptation, resilience, and ingenuity. And so, as the tide rises and falls, as water laps against foundations and embankments, as gondolas navigate deeper currents, it becomes clear that the struggle to keep Venice afloat is both eternal and extraordinary. The city's genius lies not in domination over nature, but in harmonious coexistence, in structures, canals, and social systems designed to endure, adjust, and flourish despite floods, tides, and time itself. Venice is not just a city. It is a living testament to the art of surviving on water, an ongoing story of resilience written in timber, brick, stone, and reflection. In Venice, beauty is inseparable from ingenuity. Every ornate palace, every delicate facade, every arched window perched above a shimmering canal is a triumph not just of artistry, but of engineering, a demonstration of how humans can impose order, elegance, and permanence atop an inherently unstable foundation. When we think of Venice, our eyes naturally rest on the Grand Canal, lined with palaces of white Istrian stone, delicate Gothic windows, and Baroque flourishes. But the miracle is not what is visible. The true marvel lies beneath, the countless timber piles, foundations, and construction techniques that make it possible for these heavy stone structures to stand, seemingly defying gravity, water, and centuries of tides. Each palace is a symphony of adaptation, careful calculation, and an intuitive understanding of physics. Yet it was achieved long before modern engineering textbooks existed. Venetian palaces were constructed with the understanding that the ground beneath them was not solid, but a pliable, shifting layer of mud, clay, and sand. The weight of stone, marble, and ornate decoration had to be carefully distributed to prevent uneven settling, which could crack walls or tilt entire buildings. To achieve this, builders relied on timber piles driven deep into the lagoon floor, their density, arrangement, and depth carefully tailored to each site. Some palaces required hundreds of piles, closely spaced, forming a submerged forest capable of supporting tens of tons above. These piles were capped with horizontal platforms, often of oak or larch, which created a stable surface on which walls and floors could be erected. The entire process was a delicate balance. Too few piles, and the building would settle unevenly. Too many, and water flow around the foundation could be disrupted, weakening the ground itself. Once the piles were in place, the next challenge was weight distribution. Venetian architects understood that stone and brick were heavy, and that weight concentrated in one area could crush piles or compact mud unevenly. Floors were constructed with horizontal beams, distributing weight evenly across multiple piles. Walls were often thick at the base and thinner at the top, a simple yet effective way of reducing stress while maintaining stability. Foundations were designed to absorb both vertical and lateral pressures, accounting for tides, storms, and floods. Every detail, from the thickness of stone to the placement of an arch, reflected careful observation of how buildings interacted with water and sediment over time. The facades of Venetian palaces are not merely decorative. Gothic windows, Renaissance arches, and Baroque balconies all serve structural as well as aesthetic purposes. Arches, for instance, are self-supporting. They distribute weight along the curve and down into the foundation, reducing stress on the walls beneath. Balconies, often cantilevered over canals, are supported by carefully calculated beams and corbels, ensuring that they can carry weight without compromising the stability of the main structure. Even ornamental elements, such as cornices or decorative columns, were engineered to integrate with structural requirements, merging artistry with function. Venetian architects achieved a level of precision that allowed palaces to remain standing for centuries, despite the constant movement of the city beneath them. Water, of course, adds another layer of complexity. Foundations must resist not only the weight of the building, but also the erosive and shifting forces of tides, currents, and seasonal floods. Timber piles submerged in anaerobic mud resist rot, but shifting sediments, high water, or strong currents can compromise foundations over time. To mitigate this, builders reinforced embankments, dredged canals, and monitored the condition of piles. Some palaces were built with water-facing walls coated in Istrian stone, a material highly resistant to saltwater corrosion. Stairways and doors were elevated to prevent flood damage, while interior floors were sometimes raised above typical high water levels. The careful integration of architecture with environmental forces allowed these palaces to survive, and even thrive, in a city where water is both lifeline and threat. Palaces were also designed with movement in mind. Venice is not a static city. Tides rise and fall, water pressures shift, and the city settles gradually over centuries. Architects accounted for this by designing flexible connections between structural elements, allowing walls, beams, and floors to shift slightly without cracking. Mortar mixtures were sometimes chosen for their ability to absorb slight movements, and wooden beams could flex with changes in load or water pressure. Even decorative features were engineered to tolerate subtle motion, ensuring that beauty and stability were maintained together. The city itself moves, and the architecture moves with it. The interiors of palaces reveal another dimension of ingenuity. Floors are often supported by intricate timber frameworks, distributing weight evenly across multiple piles. Large halls, libraries, and ballrooms are engineered to prevent sagging or collapse, with load-bearing walls carefully positioned to match the arrangement of foundations below. Fireplaces, staircases, and heavy furniture were considered in planning, as concentrated weight could compromise structural stability. Even the placement of windows and doors was calculated to maintain equilibrium. Openings reduce wall mass, but their size and spacing were carefully balanced to avoid destabilizing tall, narrow facades. The result is a seamless integration of function, aesthetics, and long-term stability. Construction techniques evolved over time. Early palaces relied on thick walls and heavy stone to maintain stability, while later designs incorporated arches, vaults, and cantilevered elements to reduce weight without compromising durability. Builders experimented with pile density, timber species, and capping platforms to optimize support. Some palaces were even modified after construction, walls reinforced, foundations supplemented, and facades adapted to account for settling or shifting. This continuous process of observation and adaptation is a hallmark of Venetian engineering. Structures are never truly finished. They are constantly refined to maintain equilibrium with the city's unique environment. The role of labor cannot be overstated. Teams of skilled carpenters, masons, and laborers coordinated closely to ensure precision. Piles had to be driven vertically and evenly, beams carefully aligned, and stones placed accurately. Mistakes could be catastrophic, leading to uneven settling, cracks, or collapse. Apprenticeships lasted years, with knowledge passed down through careful observation, repetition, and hands-on experience. Venetian builders mastered principles of load distribution, material durability, and hydraulic forces without formal education, relying on empirical understanding and collective memory. Their work beneath and above water demonstrates the symbiotic relationship between human skill and environmental mastery. Palaces also reflect social hierarchy and cultural expression. Wealthy families commissioned ornate buildings that not only displayed status but also incorporated advanced engineering techniques to ensure longevity. Larger palaces required more piles, denser foundations, and careful design to accommodate heavy decoration and expansive rooms. Smaller homes, by contrast, could be lighter and simpler, yet still relied on the same foundational principles. In Venice, engineering and social ambition were intertwined. The city's grandeur depended on both aesthetic vision and meticulous calculation. Flood management remained a critical concern for palaces. Ground floors often remained partially submerged during acqua alta, while upper floors served as safe living spaces. Raised entrances, staircases, and protective thresholds minimized water damage, while canals themselves acted as natural drainage channels. Over centuries, Venetians refined strategies for coping with high tides, integrating architecture with environmental monitoring and practical design. Palaces were not only static buildings, but dynamic participants in the city's ongoing negotiation with water. Even today, Venetian palaces are studied as models of sustainable, adaptive architecture. The principles building atop flexible foundations, distributing weight evenly, designing for movement, and integrating with environmental forces remain relevant for modern cities facing rising sea levels or unstable soils. Venice's palaces demonstrate that longevity is achieved not by resisting nature, but by understanding it, working with it, and continuously adapting. Every facade, arch, and balcony is a lesson in resilience, ingenuity, and elegance. Finally, the palaces of Venice are a living testament to a city's ability to balance beauty, function, and survival. They remind us that visible grandeur relies on invisible engineering, that artistry and physics can coexist, and that human ingenuity can thrive even in the most challenging environments. Each palace stands atop a hidden network of timber, mud, and ingenuity, a monument to centuries of observation, adaptation, and meticulous craftsmanship. Venice's elegance, charm, and endurance are inseparable from the extraordinary engineering that allows its palaces to float gracefully atop water, mud, and time itself. In Venice, the city does not stand alone. It is a network of islands, canals, and alleys that requires careful connectivity to function. Bridges and passageways are the veins and arteries that allow life to flow through this watery metropolis. Without them, Venice would be fragmented, its neighborhoods isolated, its commerce slowed, and its culture constrained. To walk across a Venetian bridge is to traverse centuries of innovation, adaptation, and ingenuity. Every arch, every stone, and every curve was engineered to support not just physical weight, but social, economic, and even symbolic connections. These structures are more than crossings. They are lifelines, silently binding a city afloat on mud, timber, and tide, and enabling a civilization to thrive where others might have failed. Venetians had to solve a problem that no inland city faced: how to connect a city built on islands without compromising the stability of foundations already challenged by water. Early bridges were often simple wooden planks, functional but temporary, easily replaced if damaged by floods or tides. Over time, the need for permanence, safety, and architectural expression led to stone construction, especially for bridges spanning major canals, like the Grand Canal. Stone bridges required precise engineering. Foundations had to rest on timber piles beneath mud. Arches had to distribute weight efficiently, and spans had to be wide enough to allow boats to pass beneath. Every element was a negotiation with water and sediment, an intricate balance between stability, function, and elegance. The design of Venetian bridges is remarkable for its combination of form and function. Arches, often semicircular or slightly pointed, provide strength while allowing boats to navigate the canals below. The width and height of each span were carefully calculated to accommodate tides, floods, and boat traffic, ensuring that commerce and transport could flow uninterrupted. Footpaths are often narrow, reflecting the constraints of the urban landscape, yet the bridges are structurally robust, capable of supporting crowds, markets, and occasional heavy loads without compromising the foundations beneath. The choice of Istrian stone, a dense, water-resistant material, further reinforced the longevity of these structures. Even today, centuries after their construction, many Venetian bridges bear the same stones, the same arches, and the same silent testimony to careful engineering and skilled labor. Bridges are also a story of incremental innovation. Early constructions were often reinforced with wooden supports or temporary scaffolding. Builders learned through trial and observation how water pressure, sediment, and boat traffic could affect stability. Some bridges were rebuilt multiple times, each iteration improving on the last. Over centuries, this process created a catalogue of successful design principles. Arch curvature, pile placement, stone thickness, and parapet construction were all optimized through experience. Venetian builders, without formal textbooks, mastered structural engineering intuitively, observing the effects of tides, storms, and crowds, and translating these observations into enduring architectural solutions. Beyond their structural importance, bridges shaped the social and economic life of Venice. Markets, shops, and artisans often cluster near bridges, taking advantage of foot traffic. Families and neighbors rely on bridges for daily movement, connecting homes to schools, churches, and workplaces. Bridges dictate the flow of pedestrians and carts, channeling movement through narrow alleys and across canals, effectively organizing the urban fabric. Some, like the Rialto Bridge, become commercial hubs, their arches lined with shops and stalls, while smaller bridges serve quiet residential neighborhoods. In all cases, the bridge is both infrastructure and social catalyst, shaping how Venetians move, interact, and live. The engineering of bridges also reflects an acute understanding of water dynamics. Venetian builders knew that tides, currents, and seasonal floods could exert lateral forces on piers and abutments. They designed arches to distribute pressure evenly and positioned piles to resist shifting sediment. Canal dredging and bank reinforcement were coordinated with bridge construction to prevent undermining. Even small miscalculations could lead to sagging or collapse, which is why builders meticulously observed environmental conditions and refined designs over generations. In essence, every bridge is a negotiation with the forces of nature, a structure that must coexist with both human and aquatic activity. Bridges also integrate with urban planning. Venice's narrow alleys, winding streets, and small squares are connected by a network of crossings that maximize access while minimizing interference with buildings and canals. The placement of each bridge is deliberate. Some align with main thoroughfares, while others provide shortcuts, balancing convenience, aesthetics, and structural feasibility. The bridges are not isolated monuments, but components of a larger system, where movement, commerce, and daily life are intertwined. In this sense, bridges are both connectors and organizers, shaping the city's rhythm and flow. Venetian passageways complement bridges, creating layers of connectivity above and below water. Narrow alleys, called calli, provide pedestrian routes alongside canals, while covered passageways and porticos offer sheltered movement during floods or inclement weather. Stairs and ramps allow transitions between different water levels, particularly in areas prone to seasonal inundation. These passageways are carefully integrated with bridges and buildings, ensuring that the city functions seamlessly even as tides rise and fall. Venice's urban network is thus a carefully calibrated system, where every element, canal, bridge, alley, and staircase, contributes to connectivity and resilience. The interplay between boats and bridges is also remarkable. Gondoliers and merchants navigating canals must account for bridge heights, arch spans, and currents. Bridges are positioned to allow smooth passage for boats, with arches tall enough to accommodate seasonal tides, yet low enough to maintain structural integrity. In narrow canals, coordination is essential. Boats slow, tilt, or adjust their loads to pass under arches without damage. Bridges, therefore, are not passive structures. They actively shape the movement of people and goods, mediating interactions between water, architecture, and society. Maintenance and adaptation are constant concerns. Floods, tides, and wear gradually affect bridge stability, necessitating periodic repairs. Stone parapets may be reinforced, arches rebuilt, and piles replaced to preserve integrity. Even centuries-old bridges undergo subtle adaptations to accommodate changes in canal depth, sediment accumulation, and urban activity. Venice is not a static city, and its bridges are not static either. They evolve alongside the environment, embodying a philosophy of continual adjustment, observation, and care. The cultural significance of bridges cannot be overlooked. Beyond their structural role, they shape the aesthetic and experiential qualities of the city. From the delicate Gothic arches of the Ponte dei Sospiri to the sweeping elegance of the Rialto, bridges create visual rhythms, frame vistas, and mediate perspectives. They are conduits of both movement and experience, allowing pedestrians to traverse space while observing architecture, water, and daily life. In Venice, the engineering of a bridge is inseparable from its artistic and social function. Bridges also facilitate emergency and logistical access. Firefighting, medical assistance, and goods delivery all depend on reliable crossings. The alignment of streets, canals, and bridges ensures that essential services can reach every part of the city despite the constraints imposed by water. Temporary walkways, pontoon bridges, and raised platforms supplement permanent structures during floods, demonstrating Venice's long-standing capacity for flexible, adaptive urban design. The combination of structural precision, material selection, and environmental awareness makes Venetian bridges enduring marvels. Timber piles support stone abutments, arches distribute load efficiently, and Istrian stone resists water erosion. Bridges accommodate both pedestrian traffic and seasonal flooding, integrating seamlessly with canals, alleys, and buildings. The invisible calculations behind every arch of weight, pressure, and sediment behavior reflect a deep, intuitive understanding of engineering principles. Centuries later, these structures continue to function as intended, a testament to the foresight and skill of their builders. Even today, engineers and historians study Venetian bridges for insights into sustainable, adaptive urban infrastructure. The principles using local materials, distributing weight effectively, observing environmental conditions, and designing for long-term resilience remain relevant in modern contexts, particularly for cities facing flooding or unstable ground. Venice demonstrates that architecture is not merely art or function, but an integrated response to environmental, social, and economic challenges. Bridges are where these responses are most visible, yet also most enduring, spanning centuries of water, wind, and human activity. Ultimately, Venice's bridges and passageways illustrate a fundamental truth about the city. Survival and beauty are inseparable from careful design and adaptation. Every stone arch, every narrow alley, every carefully spaced pile beneath the water contributes to a coherent, functioning whole. Venice endures because its infrastructure is not static. It is part of a living, moving system that accommodates tides, traffic, and human ambition. Walking across a bridge is to witness the invisible intelligence of generations who understood how to connect a floating city, how to balance beauty and utility, and how to thrive where others might have failed. Bridges and passageways are the physical manifestation of Venice's ingenuity. They connect islands, distribute weight, facilitate commerce, and mediate interaction between people, buildings, and water. Yet they are also metaphors for the city's resilience, stable yet flexible, functional yet beautiful, rooted in observation, skill, and experience. They allow Venice to function as a city, not a collection of isolated islands, and to endure as a civilization, not a fleeting settlement. Each crossing is a testament to the subtle genius of engineers, masons, and planners who balanced human need with environmental reality, creating a network that continues to support life, commerce, and culture across centuries. Even under the pressures of modern tourism, rising tides, and maintenance challenges, Venetian bridges remain remarkably resilient. They are both historical artifacts and living infrastructure, continuing to connect people, neighborhoods, and generations. To navigate Venice is to experience centuries of knowledge, craft, and adaptation. To cross a bridge is to participate in the same choreography of weight, water, and ingenuity that has defined the city since its earliest foundations. In essence, Venice's bridges and passageways are more than infrastructure. They are the connective tissue of a city afloat, the silent orchestrators of movement, commerce, and daily life. They embody the combination of observation, skill, and adaptation that has allowed a city built on mud and timber to endure for more than a millennium. Each arch is a triumph of engineering, each alley a lesson in urban planning, and together they form a network that is as vital to Venice's survival as its canals, palaces, and gondolas. They remind us that engineering is not just about strength, but about integration, foresight, and harmony with the forces of nature. Venice was not only a city of canals, palaces, and bridges, it was a living, breathing hub of trade, commerce, and economic ingenuity. Its location at the edge of the Adriatic Sea, at the crossroads of Europe and the East, made it a natural center for the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. But the smooth operation of trade in a city built on water required a sophisticated network of markets, warehouses, docks, and transport routes, a complex logistical system carefully designed to integrate with Venice's unique engineering challenges. Without this invisible architecture of commerce, the city's wealth, influence, and very survival would have been impossible. The flow of goods through Venice demonstrates a remarkable understanding of organization, efficiency, and adaptability, where even water itself became a crucial tool in moving people, materials, and wealth. Markets were at the heart of Venetian life, not just as places to buy and sell, but as centers where society, culture, and economy converged. The Rialto market, for instance, was more than a cluster of stalls. It was the beating heart of the city's trade network. Fish, spices, silks, wine, and grains moved in daily rhythms dictated by tides, boat schedules, and the cycles of production and demand. Merchants, dockworkers, and gondoliers coordinated their efforts with remarkable precision. Delivery boats arrived with cargo directly from the Adriatic, or even from distant lands like Constantinople and Alexandria, transferring goods to the market with minimal delay. Stalls were arranged not just for convenience but to facilitate the rapid movement of items, perishable goods near water access, spices and luxuries in central positions for easy inspection, and larger bulk items near warehouses or canals for onward transport. Markets were the nodes in a citywide network of commerce, each connected to canals, bridges, and storage facilities in a carefully orchestrated flow of materials. Warehouses, or fondaci, were equally crucial. These massive, often multi-story structures were positioned along canals, allowing boats to dock directly at loading bays. Timber piles supported the weight of heavy goods, barrels of oil, sacks of grain, chests of spices, and crates of textiles, ensuring that storage did not compromise the stability of the city. Inside, the layout facilitated both organization and security. Goods were stacked to allow access, cataloging, and inspection, while stairways and passageways permitted the movement of people and materials without disrupting operations. Many warehouses were fortified, reflecting both the value of the goods stored and the ongoing need for protection in a competitive trading environment. Venice's warehouses were not static repositories. They were dynamic spaces, constantly adjusting to tides, deliveries, and seasonal demand. The integration of canals into trade infrastructure was a stroke of genius. Boats, gondolas, and barges were the primary mode of transport, and their movement was orchestrated to avoid congestion and delays. Canals acted as both streets and conveyor belts, allowing goods to move directly from ship to market to warehouse. Loading and unloading areas were designed to minimize effort and time, with ramps, gangplanks, and quays allowing smooth transfer of heavy cargo. Timing was everything. Tides dictated when certain canals could accommodate larger vessels, while smaller gondolas carried goods through narrower, shallower channels. The city's waterborne logistics were a living system, constantly adapting to environmental conditions, seasonal variations, and economic pressures. Merchants developed ingenious methods to maximize efficiency. Floating platforms allowed for the temporary staging of goods during high tide or flood events, while lightweight carts and pulleys facilitated movement from boats to storage areas. Specialized gondolas and barges were adapted for particular cargo types, such as grain, wine, or oil, each designed to maintain stability, capacity, and ease of loading. Merchants themselves often coordinated routes, using knowledge of tides, currents, and canal depth to plan deliveries. Even the smallest alleyway could become a critical junction in the flow of goods, demonstrating that Venice's trade network was not just a matter of scale, but of integration, timing, and adaptability. Trade was also deeply tied to social and political structures. Wealthy merchant families controlled the flow of goods, financing voyages and securing storage and distribution rights. Guilds regulated quality, standards, and pricing, ensuring that goods met Venetian expectations and protected the city's reputation abroad. These institutions also coordinated labor, organizing dockworkers, stevedores, and warehouse clerks to ensure that goods moved efficiently. Markets and warehouses were thus nodes of power, as well as commerce. Controlling a warehouse meant controlling information, goods, and influence. Venice's engineering prowess extended beyond buildings and canals to encompass the invisible scaffolding of social and economic coordination. Flooding and tides posed constant challenges for trade. High water could inundate markets, submerge storage areas, and make canal navigation more difficult. Merchants and workers adapted with temporary walkways, elevated platforms, and water-resistant containers. Timing shipments around tides became routine, and contingency plans were developed for unusually high or low water levels. This adaptability was not merely practical, but essential for survival. A misjudged tide could ruin a shipment, disrupt the market, and cause economic ripple effects throughout the city. Over centuries, Venetians developed a deep understanding of water behavior, integrating it seamlessly into the logistics of commerce. The city's geography also encouraged specialization and organization. Certain districts became associated with particular trades: Rialto for fish and fresh produce, San Marco for luxury goods, and Cannaregio for storage and bulk commodities. Canals, bridges, and alleys were arranged to facilitate these concentrations, allowing for efficient access, transfer, and trade. Warehouses were often clustered near docks, while markets occupied spaces that maximized visibility and foot traffic. This spatial organization reflected both economic pragmatism and an intuitive understanding of urban planning, demonstrating that Venice's engineering extended beyond foundations and bridges to the very layout of commerce itself. The flow of goods was also a global enterprise. Venetian merchants imported spices from the east, textiles from Flanders, and glass from Murano, distributing them throughout Europe via canals, warehouses, and trade networks. Ships arriving at the lagoon were met by gondolas, barges, and specialized craft, each facilitating the movement of cargo into the heart of the city. The logistics of storage, sorting, and onward distribution required precise timing and coordination. The city's ability to move goods efficiently depended on understanding the interaction of tides, canal depth, and human labor, a combination of natural observation and learned skill that ensured Venice's reputation as a reliable center of commerce. Security and preservation were also crucial. Goods had to be protected from theft, water damage, and spoilage. Warehouses incorporated heavy doors, elevated floors, and stone-lined docks to prevent unauthorized access and protect against flooding. Markets had guards, regulations, and guild oversight to ensure integrity. Merchants themselves often traveled in convoys, coordinating the movement of valuable goods to reduce risk. Even the design of storage areas reflected this concern. Heavier items were stored on lower levels for stability, while delicate or perishable goods were placed where access and monitoring were easiest. Venice's flow of goods was not just about efficiency. It was about control, protection, and adaptation to a volatile environment. Labor and coordination were equally impressive. Dockworkers and stevedores developed specialized skills in handling large crates, barrels, and sacks, moving them efficiently between boats, warehouses, and markets. Gondoliers and bargemen synchronized movement to avoid congestion and optimize time. Markets operated on schedules dictated by tides, deliveries, and social routines. Communication was essential. Signals, bells, and messengers coordinated movement across districts. Venice was effectively a city-sized machine, powered by the combined knowledge and labor of thousands, each contributing to a flow of goods that supported both daily life and international commerce. Floods, tides, and subsidence required continual adaptation. Wooden foundations, stone quays, and warehouses were constantly repaired and reinforced to resist water damage. Temporary platforms, canals, dredged, and ramps built ensured that trade could continue despite high water. Merchants adjusted schedules to anticipate flooding, and warehouse managers arranged storage to minimize disruption. The interplay between human organization and environmental forces was constant, demonstrating that Venice's economic success was inseparable from its engineering and urban planning. The Venetian approach to trade, storage, and transportation is a lesson in holistic design. Markets, warehouses, canals, and boats were integrated into a single system that accounted for both human needs and environmental constraints. Every building, bridge, and passageway contributed to the efficiency and resilience of commerce. Venice's economic vitality depended not on individual genius, but on the cumulative knowledge of generations who observed, experimented, and refined practices over centuries. The city's wealth, influence, and survival were products of both engineering and organization, with each element reinforcing the others. Even today, the principles are relevant. Efficient logistics, adaptation to environmental constraints, and integration of infrastructure remain central to urban planning and trade. Venice demonstrates that commerce is not simply a matter of buildings or boats, but of coordinated systems, flexible design, and continuous adaptation to changing conditions. Its markets and warehouses reveal a deep understanding of how human activity, environmental forces, and material properties interact to sustain life and wealth in a challenging setting. Ultimately, Venice's markets, warehouses, and flow of goods illustrate a remarkable synthesis of engineering, organization, and culture. The city thrives because it integrates commerce with architecture, water, and social systems, ensuring that goods move efficiently, safely, and predictably through a complex environment. Trade in Venice is more than economic activity. It is an orchestration of labor, skill, and ingenuity, where each canal, quay, and warehouse plays a role in sustaining one of the most unique and enduring cities in the world. The flow of goods is the lifeblood of Venice, and the infrastructure that supports it, from timber piles beneath warehouses to bridges and canals, is as extraordinary as the city's beauty above water. Venice was not only a city of beauty, canals, and commerce, it was also a city constantly aware of threats, both human and natural. Its location at the northern edge of the Adriatic Sea, poised between Europe and the East, offered immense economic advantage, but it also made the city a target for pirates, rival states, and ambitious empires. Unlike cities built on solid ground, Venice had to defend itself, not just against armies marching on land, but against forces of water, tides, and foreign fleets that could approach from multiple directions. This required a sophisticated system of fortifications, walls, and maritime strategy, combining military engineering, urban planning, and clever adaptation to the city's unique watery environment. The defense of Venice was not a single fortress or wall, but a multi-layered network, a choreography of architecture, geography, and strategy that allowed a floating city to survive for centuries in a turbulent world. From the earliest days of Venice's development, city leaders understood that water could be both a blessing and a barrier. The lagoon surrounding the city acted as a natural moat, slowing the advance of enemies and preventing direct land-based assaults. Shallow waters, mudflats, and narrow channels complicated the navigation of large vessels and made siege operations difficult. Yet these same waters could be exploited by attackers, if not carefully controlled. Venetian engineers capitalized on this duality, designing defensive structures that enhanced the protective qualities of the lagoon while maintaining access for trade and transport. Canals were carefully aligned, embankments reinforced, and access points fortified, creating a network of natural and artificial obstacles that could repel or slow an invader while allowing the city to function smoothly. Walls were constructed strategically along key areas, particularly at the edges of islands and along the most vulnerable approaches. Unlike typical inland city walls, Venetian walls often incorporated water defenses. Moats, flooded zones, and canal barriers extended the protective reach of masonry structures. Stone bastions were built on timber piles, distributing the immense weight across mud and clay foundations. Much like the palaces and warehouses described in earlier segments, towers rose at intervals, providing vantage points for observation and signaling, while gates controlled access to both land and canal traffic. Every element was designed with careful attention to balance, ensuring that the structures could resist attack, weight, and water pressure simultaneously. Fortresses were equally crucial, particularly at the lagoon's entrances. Fortifications, such as the Arsenal, Murano's defenses, and island forts controlled key maritime routes, allowing Venice to monitor and regulate the movement of vessels. Cannons, artillery platforms, and defensive walls were carefully positioned to maximize coverage while taking advantage of tidal and wind conditions. Engineers considered not just line of fire, but the stability of foundations. Heavy artillery could not rest on unstable mud without precise pile placement and reinforcement. These fortresses were living systems, constantly maintained, upgraded, and adapted to new threats, reflecting centuries of experience in balancing military power with environmental constraints. Maritime strategy was as important as static defenses. Venice relied on its fleet, not only for trade, but for projection of power, reconnaissance, and defense. Ships were stationed strategically at lagoon entrances and key canals, ready to intercept attackers before they reached the city. The fleet's mobility complemented the fixed fortifications, allowing the city to respond dynamically to threats. Naval tactics were designed around the unique conditions of the Adriatic. Shallow waters, tidal patterns, and narrow channels shaped both offensive and defensive maneuvers. Venice became a city where engineering, geography, and strategy converged, each element reinforcing the other in a coordinated effort to maintain security. Even the layout of streets, canals, and bridges contributed to defense. Narrow alleys, winding passageways, and controlled access points hindered the movement of invaders, while allowing residents and troops to mobilize quickly. Bridges could be partially barricaded, canals blocked, and streets flooded temporarily to slow attackers. Defensive planning extended from fortresses and walls down to the smallest urban details, ensuring that every element of the city's infrastructure contributed to resilience. The city itself was a weapon. Its shape, materials, and network of canals were part of a deliberate defensive architecture, designed over centuries to balance accessibility, commerce, and protection. Venetians also mastered the art of camouflage and deception in their defenses. Approaches through the lagoon could be guided or misdirected using false channels, stakes hidden beneath water, and carefully constructed banks. Attackers unfamiliar with the maze of shallow waterways risked grounding, capsizing, or being funneled into defensive choke points. This reliance on intimate local knowledge gave Venice a strategic advantage. The city itself became a natural trap for those who did not understand its intricacies. Timber piles, submerged foundations, and even everyday canal arrangements were employed as elements of defense, blurring the line between urban design and military engineering. Floods and tides were both challenge and tool in Venetian defense. High water could prevent armies from accessing certain areas, while low water could expose channels for rapid deployment of troops or artillery. Engineers monitored water levels, using dikes, sluices, and canals to manipulate the flow strategically. The interplay between human intervention and natural forces created a dynamic defensive system, where the environment itself contributed to the city's security. Venice demonstrates that successful defense is not merely a matter of walls or soldiers, but of orchestrating human and environmental factors into a coherent strategy. Even construction materials were chosen with defense in mind. Istrian stone, used extensively in walls, fortresses, and embankments, is dense, water-resistant, and durable, able to withstand both cannon fire and constant tidal immersion. Timber piles beneath walls and bastions distributed weight evenly, preventing settling or collapse under heavy artillery. Mortar and masonry techniques were refined over generations to resist water infiltration, erosion, and impact damage. Every element of defensive construction combined the lessons of architecture, engineering, and material science, ensuring that the city's defenses were robust, adaptable, and long-lasting. Logistics of defense were also meticulously planned. Garrison troops, cannons, and supplies needed to move efficiently through canals and streets. Temporary bridges, drawbridges, and elevated passageways allowed soldiers to access vulnerable areas quickly. Storage facilities near fortresses and along key canals held ammunition, food, and materials to sustain prolonged sieges, Command and communication systems relied on observation towers, signal flags, and messengers to coordinate defense across multiple islands. Venice's defensive network was not just structural, it was an operational system integrating people, materials, and information into a cohesive strategy. Coordination with the civilian population was another aspect of Venice's defense. Residents were familiar with flood zones, barricades, and escape routes. Civic duty, militia service, and local knowledge ensured that the city could mobilize quickly in response to threats. Citizens understood that the safety of the city depended on maintaining infrastructure, bridges, embankments, and streets, and participating in emergency measures. Venice was a city where engineering, strategy, and social cohesion intersected, creating resilience not through isolation but through collective awareness and preparedness. Venice also adapted its fortifications to evolving military technology. The introduction of gunpowder, cannons, and more powerful artillery necessitated thicker walls, angled bastions, and repositioned towers. Engineers analyzed the trajectory of cannonballs, water erosion, and the impact on foundations to refine designs. Timber and stone were combined in innovative ways to absorb shock, distribute load, and resist damage. The city's defenses were dynamic, evolving alongside technology rather than remaining static relics of the past. Venice exemplified foresight. Fortifications were built to endure not just current threats, but future innovations in warfare. Even smaller islands and peripheral canals were fortified strategically. Outlying islands acted as buffers, hosting forts, watchtowers, and artillery batteries that could engage approaching enemies before they reached the heart of Venice. Timber stakes, hidden beneath shallow waters, combined with narrow channels and misdirected navigation routes, created natural choke points that could be defended efficiently. Each island, each canal, and each structure contributed to a layered system of defense, where redundancy, observation, and control of movement were key principles. Venice's maritime strategy extended beyond visible walls. The city itself was a weaponized landscape. Maintenance was continuous. Saltwater tidal movement and storms constantly threatened the integrity of walls, fortresses, and foundations. Timber piles compressed, masonry eroded, and canals silted. Engineers and laborers were constantly engaged in repairs, reinforcements, and upgrades. Venice's resilience depended on the vigilance and skill of generations, ensuring that the city remained fortified even as it aged, shifted, and adapted to changing conditions. The defense of Venice was not a one-time achievement, but a living process, sustained through centuries of observation, labor, and adaptation. The psychological impact of these defenses was also significant. Enemies approaching Venice faced a city that seemed simultaneously fragile and impenetrable, beautiful yet forbidding, intricate yet overwhelming. The complexity of canals, islands, and fortifications created uncertainty and fear, magnifying the effectiveness of relatively small forces defending the city. Venice demonstrates that engineering is not only about physical durability, but about perception, strategy, and the careful manipulation of both environment and human psychology. Finally, the defense of Venice illustrates the remarkable integration of urban design, military engineering, and environmental awareness. Every wall, fortress, canal, and embankment contributed to a coherent strategy, ensuring that the city could survive both human aggression and natural challenges. The floating city was not defenseless. It was a carefully orchestrated system, balancing architecture, water, and strategy. Centuries of observation, experimentation, and adaptation allowed Venice to withstand invasions, protect commerce, and maintain its independence long after many other Mediterranean powers fell. Venice's legacy in defense is not only historical but instructive. The city demonstrates that successful protection requires understanding the interaction of natural forces, human activity, and engineered structures. Fortresses, walls, and maritime strategy are not isolated solutions, but parts of a larger system where every element, canal, pile, tower, and street contributes to resilience. Venice teaches that defense, like the city itself, is an ongoing dialogue between human ingenuity and environmental conditions. A conversation maintained through centuries of observation, adaptation, and careful planning. In conclusion, the defense of a floating city required Venice to innovate, adapt, and integrate every element of its landscape into a cohesive system. Walls, fortresses, canals, and islands worked together to repel enemies, manage tides, and protect commerce. Military engineering, urban design, and environmental awareness were inseparable, creating a city that could survive for centuries despite its unique challenges. Venice's fortifications, both visible and hidden, reflect a deep understanding of strategy, material science, and human coordination, ensuring that this extraordinary city could endure as both a hub of commerce and a marvel of engineering. Venice is a city that floats, not just physically on the waters of the lagoon, but existentially above a delicate balance between human habitation and nature's whims. Yet for all its beauty, its palaces, bridges, and thriving markets, Venice has always had to contend with a formidable and unpredictable adversary: water itself. The phenomenon known as acqua alta, or high water, is both a natural rhythm and a persistent threat, capable of inundating streets, squares, and buildings with remarkable speed. Floods have shaped Venetian life for centuries, dictating when and how people move, trade, and live. The battle against rising waters is an ongoing saga, one that blends engineering, observation, adaptation, and communal resilience in a city where survival and water are inseparable. The waters of the Venetian lagoon are influenced by tides, seasonal weather patterns, and winds blowing across the Adriatic Sea. Normally, canals rise and fall gently, ebbing with the tide. But during acqua alta, a combination of high tides, low atmospheric pressure, and strong winds can push water into the lagoon, raising levels several feet above the norm. Streets turn into shallow rivers, piazzas become reflective pools, and the ground floors of buildings are partially submerged. While these floods rarely last more than a few hours, their impact is immediate. Commerce slows, movement is restricted, and even the most robust timber pile foundations are tested. Venetians learned early that survival depended on understanding these rhythms and developing strategies to live with, rather than merely fight. Water observation was the first line of defense. Generations of Venetians studied tides, winds, and rainfall, keeping careful records and developing intuitive knowledge of how weather patterns affected water levels. The city's inhabitants learned to anticipate the arrival of high water, preparing walkways, lifting goods off floors, and closing canal-side doors to prevent damage. Timing became central to daily life. Deliveries were scheduled to avoid peak tide periods, markets adjusted operations, and canals were dredged to maintain flow even under high water conditions. This intimate knowledge of environmental patterns allowed Venice to develop adaptive strategies long before the advent of modern meteorology or hydraulic engineering. Engineering followed observation. Elevated walkways, known as passerelle, were installed to allow pedestrian movement during floods. These temporary structures could be laid across flooded squares and streets, creating safe corridors that connected homes, churches, and markets. Ground floors were often left intentionally flood-resistant, constructed with water-resistant stone, elevated thresholds, and drainage channels. Buildings were designed to absorb occasional inundation. Timber floors and foundations allowed for slight water penetration without structural compromise, while stone and brick walls resisted erosion. Even staircases, bridges, and canals were constructed with the awareness that water levels would rise unpredictably, requiring both flexibility and durability. Flood management extended beyond individual buildings. The city as a whole incorporated hydraulic strategies to mitigate water intrusion. Canals were dredged regularly to maintain capacity, embankments reinforced to resist erosion, and sluices or gates installed to control water flow. In some areas, sandbags and temporary barriers were employed during extreme events, a practice refined over centuries to protect critical infrastructure. Engineers also studied the interaction between tides and wind, understanding that certain combinations could exacerbate flooding and adjusting construction and canal layout accordingly. Venice became not just a city on water, but a city that actively negotiated with water, designing urban spaces to survive, channel, and even exploit the movement of the lagoon. The social aspect of flood adaptation is equally important. Community cooperation has always been vital to navigating acqua alta. Residents coordinate the installation of raised walkways, the movement of goods to upper floors, and the reinforcement of doors and thresholds. Civic authorities monitor tides, issue warnings, and organize labor for emergency measures. Knowledge is passed down through generations. families learn how to protect homes, merchants safeguard stock, and children grow up navigating a city that can transform dramatically in a matter of hours. Venice demonstrates that the battle against floods is as much about coordination and culture as it is about engineering. Canal transport itself is affected by rising waters. Gondolas and barges, normally reliable for moving goods and people, must contend with higher currents, submerged obstacles, and altered navigation channels. Experienced gondoliers adjust routes and timing, leveraging knowledge of tides to maintain safe and efficient movement. During extreme acqua alta, some canals become impassable, forcing temporary rerouting or use of elevated walkways for pedestrian traffic. The city's transport system is flexible by design, able to adapt to conditions that would cripple conventional urban infrastructure, illustrating the ingenious integration of water, architecture, and human skill. Structural engineering is central to flood resilience. Timber piles supporting buildings are submerged, a condition that, paradoxically, preserves wood by limiting oxygen exposure and preventing rot. Stone foundations and embankments are carefully maintained to resist erosion, while drainage channels help remove water quickly from streets and courtyards. Walls, floors, and staircases are designed to withstand repeated exposure to brackish water, ensuring that buildings survive even after decades of seasonal inundation. Venice demonstrates that durability in a watery environment requires not just strong materials, but careful attention to how structures interact with natural cycles of flooding and subsidence. Floods also shape commerce and markets. Merchants adjust schedules, relocating stock to upper floors or temporary storage during high water events. Markets can shift location temporarily to accommodate rising canals, and delivery routes are modified to maintain the flow of goods. Even warehouses are designed with elevated platforms, drainage channels, and water-resistant materials to preserve critical inventory. Venice's economy is intimately tied to its ability to adapt to environmental conditions, demonstrating that urban survival is a combination of engineering, observation, and logistical planning. Over centuries, Venetians refined both temporary and permanent flood mitigation measures. Temporary barriers, raised walkways, and movable bridges are complemented by more permanent solutions, reinforced embankments, elevated foundations, and canal improvements. Architects and engineers carefully monitored the long-term impact of tides and flooding on buildings, adapting construction techniques to reduce stress on foundations and minimize erosion. The city's infrastructure is thus a living system, continuously evolving to meet the challenges posed by rising waters. Scientific observation played a role as well. By the 18th and 19th centuries, engineers and scholars were measuring tides, recording water levels, and studying patterns of flooding with increasing precision. This knowledge informed decisions about canal dredging, embankment reinforcement, and building adaptation. It also provided insights for long-term planning, allowing the city to anticipate changes in sea level, sedimentation, and urban settlement patterns. Venice's approach to floods demonstrates that human ingenuity is most effective when combined with careful observation and data-driven understanding of environmental forces. Even cultural adaptation is evident. Venetians have incorporated flooding into daily life and rituals. Seasonal high water is observed, prepared for, and even commemorated in festivals and traditions. Children grow up learning to navigate raised walkways, markets adapt to changing conditions, and residents adjust social routines to accommodate the ebb and flow of water. Venice is thus a city where environment and culture are inseparable. Water is not merely a threat, but a shaping force in the rhythm of life. Modern efforts continue this tradition. Flood barriers, pumps, and monitoring systems have been introduced to reduce the impact of acqua alta, but the principles remain the same: observation, adaptation, and integration with the city's infrastructure. Historical buildings are reinforced, canals maintained, and raised walkways deployed during peak events. Venice's centuries-long experience demonstrates that resilience is not about resisting nature entirely, but working with it, understanding patterns, and building flexibility into every level of urban life. The psychological impact of flooding is also significant. Residents develop an intimate awareness of tides, weather, and risk, cultivating patience, foresight, and adaptability. Life in Venice requires constant vigilance and a mental map of water levels, safe routes, and emergency measures. floods become part of the collective consciousness, shaping behavior, planning, and urban culture. The city's relationship with water is simultaneously practical, cultural, and philosophical, reflecting a deep ongoing dialogue between humans and environment. Finally, Acqua Alta exemplifies Venice's remarkable ability to adapt over centuries. The city's buildings, canals, markets, and social systems all reflect an understanding that water is not simply an obstacle, but an integral part of life. Engineering solutions, from timber piles to raised walkways, are complemented by cultural adaptation, logistical planning, and community coordination. Venice survives and thrives because it has learned to move with the water rather than against it, integrating the rhythms of tides into the architecture, commerce, and daily life of a city unlike any other. In essence, Venice's struggle against flooding is a testament to human ingenuity, observation, and resilience. The city demonstrates that survival in a challenging environment requires more than strong walls or clever engineering. It requires understanding, adaptation, and the integration of human activity with natural forces. Acqua Alta is both a challenge and a defining feature of Venetian life, shaping architecture, commerce, culture, and urban design in ways that remain relevant today. Venice does not merely endure floods, it thrives alongside them, a floating city in continuous dialogue with water, tides, and time. Venice is renowned for its romantic canals, majestic palaces, and gondolas gliding under centuries-old bridges. Yet beneath this picturesque surface lies a complex and hidden world of sewers, channels, and drainage systems, engineered with precision long before modern sanitation. In a city built entirely on water, where streets are canals and buildings rest on timber piles submerged in mud, managing waste was not simply a matter of convenience, it was a matter of survival. Without careful planning, the very waters that sustain Venice could have become a deadly source of disease, contamination, and decay. The city's secret waterways tell the story of ingenuity, adaptation, and the quiet, often invisible engineering that allowed Venice to endure in a challenging and precarious environment. From the earliest days of its development, Venice's inhabitants understood that waste management was inseparable from water management. Every household produced organic refuse, greywater, and sewage, all of which had to be removed without contaminating the canals used for drinking, cooking, and transport. This problem was compounded by the fact that the city's foundations were timber piles driven into mud, making conventional underground sewer networks impractical. Engineers and civic planners devised ingenious solutions, turning the limitations of their environment into opportunities for innovation. Private and public channels, drainage culverts, and carefully sloped floors directed wastewater toward controlled outlets, preventing stagnation and maintaining the delicate balance of fresh water and brackish lagoon water. Canals themselves functioned as primary conduits of both transport and sanitation. Small, narrow canals often doubled as drainage channels, carrying runoff and household waste away from inhabited areas. Larger canals acted as main arteries, flushing water and debris with the tide. Venetian engineers understood the importance of timing and flow. Tidal movement naturally replaced stagnant water, washing away organic matter and maintaining relative foundations, quays, and buildings were aligned with canal currents to optimize drainage, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics centuries before hydrodynamics became a formal science. Private households contributed to this system through internal design. Kitchens, workshops, and bathrooms were positioned with slight gradients toward external drains. Wastewater from sinks and basins flowed directly into small, discrete channels, often beneath narrow alleyways, before entering the canals. Buildings were elevated slightly above street or canal level, reducing the risk of backflow during high tides, and thresholds were reinforced to withstand occasional inundation. These subtle architectural features, invisible to most visitors, reflect an extraordinary integration of engineering and daily life, where water, waste, and habitation coexist in carefully calibrated harmony. Public infrastructure complemented these private solutions. Drainage culverts, sluices, and small bridges incorporated openings to allow water and refused to flow away efficiently. During maintenance or flooding, these conduits could be cleared of debris or temporarily blocked to manage flow. Venetian authorities established guidelines and oversight to prevent obstruction, ensure sanitation, and coordinate communal action. Waste disposal was both an individual and civic responsibility, highlighting the interplay between engineering, governance, and social organization in maintaining the city's health. One of the most remarkable aspects of Venice's hidden waterways is their adaptability. As the city expanded, new islands were settled, canals were rerouted, and buildings grew taller. The drainage network evolved in parallel. Culverts were extended, slopes adjusted, and discharge points relocated to account for changing tides, settlement patterns, and population density. The system was not static. It was a living infrastructure, responding to both environmental and social pressures. Venice demonstrates that urban sanitation in a water-bound city is not merely about removing waste, but about integrating human activity with natural forces to sustain life over centuries. Industrial activity, workshops, and commercial areas presented additional challenges. Leather tanneries, dye workshops, and markets produced both solid and liquid waste, often in large quantities. Specialized drainage channels were constructed to separate these effluents from residential areas, preventing contamination and protecting water quality. Canals near industrial zones were sometimes wider or deeper, facilitating the flushing of heavier or more concentrated waste, while sluices controlled flow to minimize stagnation. Venice's approach reflects both practical problem-solving and early forms of environmental engineering, balancing economic activity with public health concerns. Maintenance of these hidden waterways was a constant and labor-intensive task. Debris, sediment, and organic matter accumulated in culverts, drains, and canals, requiring periodic dredging and cleaning. Laborers, often working in difficult and unsanitary conditions, ensured that water continued to flow freely, preventing blockages that could disrupt commerce, navigation, and daily life. Civic oversight was critical. Regulations mandated cleaning schedules, inspections, and repairs, creating a system where engineering, labor, and governance were tightly intertwined to maintain the city's functioning. Flooding and aqua alta introduced additional complexity. Rising water could overwhelm smaller drainage channels, backflow into buildings, and contaminate streets. Engineers countered this with adjustable sluices, elevated drains, and temporary barriers that redirected water and debris. The interaction between tide and waste management became a carefully orchestrated system. High water flushed canals, while protective structures prevented damage to buildings and markets. Venice's ability to manage sanitation under these conditions is a testament to the city's foresight and technical skill. The social implications of Venice's hidden waterways are profound. Residents adapted their daily routines to accommodate both water and sanitation, learning to navigate elevated walkways, manage household waste, and maintain canals adjacent to their homes. Merchants and craftsmen coordinated operations to minimize disruption, while authorities monitored compliance with communal standards. Knowledge of drainage systems was embedded in the collective consciousness, reflecting a culture in which environmental awareness, engineering literacy, and civic responsibility were inseparable from daily life. The design of Venice's hidden waterways also reflects early understanding of ecological principles. Canals were not just conduits for human waste, they were dynamic systems that supported aquatic life, sediment transport, and water purification. Engineers observed how currents, tides, and temperature influenced decomposition, flow, and sediment deposition, adjusting construction to optimize natural processes. This integration of engineering and ecology demonstrates a remarkable awareness of sustainability long before the term existed, showing that the health of a city depended on working with, rather than against, natural forces. Venice's sewers were complemented by waste management practices. Night soil, or human waste, was sometimes collected and repurposed as fertilizer outside the city, preventing accumulation in canals and contributing to agricultural productivity in the surrounding lagoon. Trade and industry produced solid byproducts that were carefully managed to avoid contamination. The city's approach combined engineering solutions with practical logistics and social coordination, ensuring that waste did not overwhelm the system or compromise health. Hidden waterways also contributed to resilience against disease. In a densely populated city, stagnant water and uncontained waste could lead to outbreaks of cholera, plague, and other illnesses. Venice's combination of flowing canals, culverts, sluices, and elevated structures reduced stagnation and exposure, creating conditions that mitigated risk. While the city was not immune to epidemics, the engineering of its hidden waterways provided a foundation for public health that allowed it to recover and continue thriving. The ingenuity of Venice's hidden waterways is perhaps most apparent in their longevity. Centuries after construction, many of the original channels, drains, and culverts continue to function, albeit maintained and adapted over time. Timber piles, stone conduits, and brick vaults have endured repeated flooding, subsidence, and tidal pressure, illustrating that effective engineering is as much about foresight and material choice as it is about construction techniques. Venice demonstrates that even in a fragile, water-bound environment, thoughtful design can create infrastructure that survives centuries. Cultural adaptation reinforced these engineering solutions. Venetians developed routines, rituals, and social norms around sanitation, ensuring that human behavior complemented technical infrastructure. Households managed waste with care, communal labor maintained canals, and authorities coordinated efforts across districts. The city's hidden waterways were not just passive structures, but part of a dynamic system of social and environmental engineering, where human activity, urban design, and natural forces interacted seamlessly. Modern engineers study Venice's hidden waterways for insights into sustainable urban design in challenging environments. The principles integration of natural forces, use of durable materials, adaptive design, and social coordination remain relevant for cities facing flooding, high water tables, or dense populations. Venice provides a historical example of how engineering, observation, and culture can converge to sustain life in an environment that would otherwise be inhospitable. Ultimately, Venice's secret sewers and hidden waterways reveal a city built not just on beauty, commerce, or culture, but on a foundation of intelligence, observation, and foresight. Every drain, culvert, and canal reflects centuries of experimentation, adaptation, and learning. Venice survives because its inhabitants understood that water is both a resource and a threat, and that managing its movement, whether through tides, waste, or drainage, is central to life, health, and prosperity. These hidden systems are the silent engineers of the city, invisible to most visitors, yet essential to the functioning of one of the most unique urban environments in human history. In essence, the secret sewers of Venice demonstrate that survival in a water-bound city requires more than grand palaces, ornate bridges, or bustling markets. It requires attention to the unseen, the overlooked, and the continuous negotiation between human needs and natural forces. The city's hidden waterways are a testament to ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience, a quiet, enduring network that allows life to flourish above and below the surface. Venice teaches us that engineering is not only about visible triumphs, but also about the subtle, invisible systems that sustained life, commerce, and civilization itself. Venice is often celebrated for its breathtaking skyline of palaces, churches, and ornate facades. But the true wonder lies not in their beauty alone. It lies in the remarkable engineering that allows these massive structures to stand, seemingly suspended over water on a fragile lagoon foundation. Venetian palaces are more than architectural masterpieces. They are triumphs of ingenuity, patience, and adaptation to one of the most challenging environments ever attempted by human builders. Understanding their foundations, facades, and structural systems reveals a city that is as much an engineering marvel as it is a cultural icon. The first challenge in constructing a Venetian palace was the foundation. Unlike buildings on solid ground, Venetian structures rest on a thick layer of mud, silt, and sand, over which the lagoon waters constantly flow. Engineers developed a solution that was both simple in concept and extraordinary in execution. Timber piles driven deep into the lagoon bed, often several meters below the surface. These piles, typically made from alder or oak, resist decay when submerged in water, as the anaerobic conditions prevent rotting. Each pile acts like a leg, transferring the building's weight from the soft sediment to the firmer layers beneath. Tens of thousands of these piles were driven for larger palaces, sometimes over decades, creating a stable platform that allowed massive stone and brick buildings to rise above the water. Above the piles, builders laid horizontal beams, often of larch or oak, forming a dense mat that distributed weight evenly across the foundation. On top of this mat, stone or brick footings were constructed to further stabilize the structure. This method created a rigid, floating-like base that could absorb shifts in the mud and water without compromising the building's integrity. Over centuries, these foundations have compressed slightly under the weight of buildings, a slow settling process that engineers anticipated and accommodated in design, showing remarkable foresight and understanding of material behavior. The palace's facades were another feat of ingenuity. Venice was not only a city of engineering, but also of display, where architectural beauty communicated wealth, power, and taste. Facades were often built of Istrian limestone, a dense, water-resistant stone, and decorated with marble, stucco, and intricate carvings. Engineers had to balance aesthetic ambitions with structural requirements. Heavy decorative elements were carefully distributed to avoid uneven load on foundations, while large windows and balconies were supported by hidden arches and buttresses. Venetian architects mastered the delicate equilibrium between beauty and stability, creating facades that are visually striking yet capable of enduring centuries of tidal pressure, subsidence, and water exposure. Palaces were often multi-story structures, with ground floors partially submerged during high tides and upper floors designed for habitation and reception. The ground floor, or piano terra, served multiple purposes: storage, commercial activity, and protection against flooding. The walls were thicker, built of robust materials to withstand occasional inundation, while upper floors featured lighter construction to reduce weight. Columns, arches, and vaults distributed structural loads efficiently, allowing expansive rooms, grand halls, and lodges without compromising stability. Engineers understood that every stone, arch, and beam contributed to the palace. His ability to endure both the weight of its own structure and the shifting forces of the lagoon beneath. Water management was integrated into palace design. Canals often ran directly along facades, allowing boats to deliver goods directly to storage areas. Ground floors had elevated entrances, drainage channels, and water-resistant thresholds. Wooden platforms and removable gangways allowed residents and workers to navigate flooded streets, ensuring that commerce and daily life could continue even during aqua alta. Palaces were thus designed not as static monuments, but as adaptive structures, capable of responding to environmental pressures while maintaining aesthetic elegance. The interior engineering of palaces also reveals sophistication. Floors were often constructed from layered timber, brick, and stone, with attention to weight distribution, ventilation, and moisture control. Vaulted ceilings, arches, and buttresses minimize stress on walls, allowing open spaces for gatherings, dining halls, and ceremonial rooms. Engineers considered both structural and environmental factors. Timber was selected for its resistance to humidity, while walls were treated to prevent water infiltration. Even decorative elements, such as frescoes and mosaics, were installed with techniques that accommodated slight movement and settlement, ensuring that the palace could endure both time and tide. Bridges, staircases, and balconies were integrated seamlessly into palace design. Bridges connected private residences to streets, canals, and neighboring buildings, often with arches that accommodated tidal fluctuations and boat traffic. Staircases were elevated and supported by concealed beams, allowing access between floors even during floods. Balconies were not merely decorative. They served as observation points, ventilation channels, and extensions of living space. Every element was carefully considered, reflecting a culture where engineering and lifestyle were intertwined, and where aesthetics never compromised functionality. Palaces also incorporated logistics and commerce into their design. Ground floors often included warehouses, storage rooms, and boat docks, facilitating trade and the transport of goods. Merchants and noble families integrated their economic activities into their homes, with careful separation of residential and commercial spaces. This dual functionality required both structural ingenuity and spatial planning, balancing the demands of business, residence, and environmental adaptation. Venice's palaces were thus microcosms of the city itself, blending commerce, social life, and engineering into a cohesive whole. Foundations were reinforced periodically to address subsidence and shifting tides. Over centuries, piles compressed, mud compacted, and water levels fluctuated. Engineers and carpenters undertook maintenance campaigns to replace damaged piles, add reinforcements, and repair foundations. Techniques included underwater pile replacement, injection of mortar, and addition of support beams, reflecting a continuous process of adaptation and care. Venice's palaces are therefore living structures, maintained over generations, demonstrating the city's long-term commitment to resilience and preservation. Even environmental awareness played a role. Engineers accounted for the interaction between tides, sedimentation, and water flow, positioning palaces to minimize erosion and maximize drainage. Canals were dredged near foundations, embankments reinforced, and vegetation sometimes managed to reduce water impact. The city's architectural landscape is thus inseparable from its hydrological environment, reflecting a deep understanding of the interplay between built structures and natural forces. Cultural symbolism was integrated into engineering. Facades, lodges, and ornamentation communicated family wealth, civic pride, and social status. Columns, arches, and decorative stonework were not only artistic statements, but also functional elements, supporting load, distributing stress, and enhancing stability. Venetian palaces thus exemplify a holistic approach, where aesthetics, engineering, and social function converge seamlessly, creating buildings that are simultaneously practical, beautiful, and symbolic. Innovation extended to materials as well. Istrian stone, brick, and timber were combined to maximize durability, resistance to water, and weight distribution. Mortar was formulated to withstand brackish water exposure, while wood was treated to resist decay. Engineers understood the long-term interaction of materials with water, tides, and environmental stresses, designing structures that would endure centuries. Venice's architectural choices reflect both local resourcefulness and advanced engineering foresight. Palaces were also designed for adaptability. Modifications, expansions, and restorations were common over centuries, and engineers accounted for potential future changes. Foundations were often overbuilt, facades reinforced, and timber mats extended to allow additional weight. This flexibility ensured that palaces could accommodate changing family needs, social trends, or environmental challenges without compromising structural integrity. Venice's architecture reflects not static genius, but an ongoing process of adaptation, repair, and evolution in response to human and natural forces. Even the relationship between palaces and canals demonstrates subtle engineering mastery. Facades facing canals were constructed with extra reinforcement to withstand water pressure, boats, and tidal currents. Mooring posts, stone quays, and water gates were integrated into design, allowing access without compromising stability. Canals themselves were engineered to support the movement of goods, provide drainage, and facilitate trade, demonstrating that palace architecture and urban water management were inseparable. Palaces also embody social engineering. Their layouts balance privacy, commerce, and ceremonial functions. Reception halls, private chambers, and service areas were organized to accommodate family life, guests, and servants efficiently. Logistics of trade and domestic life were built into the architecture, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of human behavior, traffic flow, and spatial dynamics. Engineering was thus inseparable from social design, and palaces functioned as integrated systems, supporting both habitation and commerce. Maintenance and longevity were central to palace design. Venetian architects anticipated the slow subsidence of foundations, tidal erosion, and material wear. Restoration was a continual process. Timber piles replaced or reinforced, masonry repaired, and facades cleaned and stabilized. The city's palaces are living testimony to centuries of attentive care, demonstrating that effective architecture is not only about initial construction, but about ongoing stewardship. Ultimately, Venetian palaces illustrate a remarkable synthesis of engineering, architecture, and culture. Foundations, facades, interiors, and logistics were designed to withstand the unique challenges of a waterbound city. Every beam, pile, and stone block reflects centuries of accumulated knowledge, adaptation, and foresight. Venice's palaces are not merely beautiful buildings, they are floating systems, carefully calibrated to survive tides, floods, subsidence, and time itself. The city's ability to merge aesthetics with structural resilience, beauty with practicality, and habitation with commerce remains unparalleled. In essence, Venetian palaces are a celebration of human ingenuity in harmony with nature. They demonstrate that architectural brilliance is inseparable from engineering, that beauty can coexist with practicality, and that a city built on water can achieve permanence through adaptation, observation, and technical skill. Venice's palaces float not just on timber piles, but on centuries of knowledge, craftsmanship, and unwavering commitment to survive above the waters that define the city's extraordinary character. Venice stands today as a city of contradictions, timeless yet impermanent, breathtakingly beautiful yet fragile, serene on the surface yet constantly negotiating the pressures of nature, time, and human activity. It is a city built on water, a marvel of engineering, architecture, and adaptation, whose history offers lessons that remain relevant for our modern world. After centuries of human ingenuity, floods, trade, and the ebb and flow of the lagoon, Venice remains a living testament to the resilience, creativity, and perseverance of its builders. The legacy of Venice is not simply in its visual splendor, its palaces, bridges, and canals, but in the extraordinary systems techniques and human ingenuity that allow this floating city to survive against odds that would overwhelm most other settlements. Walking through Venice today, one can see the cumulative effects of centuries of careful planning and engineering. The foundations of buildings, hidden beneath water, continue to support grand palaces and bustling shops. Canals, once designed primarily for trade and drainage, remain the arteries of the city, directing movement, commerce, and even floodwaters. Bridges, some centuries old, still arch gracefully over canals, designed to accommodate both gondolas and tides. Every corner of the city tells a story of adaptation. Timber piles driven into mud to form stable foundations, Istrian stone facades resistant to saltwater erosion, elevated walkways that allow life to continue even during aqua alta. Venice is not just a museum of the past, it is a living laboratory where ancient ingenuity meets modern challenge. Modern engineers, urban planners, and historians continue to study Venice to understand how a city can thrive on water. The methods developed centuries ago, timber pile foundations, canal engineering, tidal observation, and layered urban infrastructure, remain relevant for contemporary cities dealing with flooding, high water tables, and climate change. Venice demonstrates that engineering is not only about grand structures, but about understanding natural forces, observing patterns, and designing systems that integrate human life with the environment. The city's lessons extend far beyond its borders, providing insights into sustainability, resilience, and the careful use of resources. Yet the challenges Venice faces today highlight the delicate balance that its ingenuity has achieved. Rising sea levels, increased frequency of extreme weather, and subsidence threaten the very systems that have allowed Venice to endure for centuries. Modern interventions, such as the MOS flood barrier project, aim to protect the city from exceptional high tides, but they also underscore the continuing need for careful management and adaptation. Venice is a reminder that no engineering, however advanced, is permanent without ongoing observation, maintenance, and a deep understanding of environmental forces. The city's history teaches that human intervention must work with natural systems rather than against them, and that resilience requires foresight, flexibility, and humility in the face of nature's unpredictability. The cultural and social dimensions of Venice's survival are equally significant. Centuries of civic responsibility, communal labor, and shared knowledge ensured that the city's hidden systems, drainage channels, foundations, embankments, and flood mitigation structures were maintained and improved. Residents knew their city intimately, understood its rhythms, and coordinated actions to preserve its functionality. This collective engagement was as vital to Venice's longevity as the engineering itself, illustrating that sustainable cities require not only technical skill but social cohesion and civic awareness. The lessons of Venice suggest that resilience is both physical and social, emerging from the integration of infrastructure, knowledge, and community action. Tourism, while vital to the city's economy, also highlights the challenges of preserving Venice's delicate systems. Millions of visitors traverse its bridges, float along its canals, and occupy its palaces, placing unprecedented stress on structures designed centuries ago. Engineers and planners balance access with preservation, using data, observation, and careful planning to prevent damage to foundations, facades, and canal systems. Venice demonstrates that historical urban engineering can remain functional in a modern context, but only when combined with adaptive management and respect for the delicate balance between human activity and environmental constraints. Venice's architectural legacy continues to inspire. Palaces, churches, and public buildings illustrate the integration of beauty, function, and resilience. Architects today study the interplay of timber foundations, stone facades, and structural load distribution to inform new projects in flood-prone regions. The city's approach to combining aesthetics with engineering, commerce with habitation, and beauty with practical resilience offers lessons in holistic urban design. Venice teaches that engineering does not exist in isolation. It is inseparable from social, cultural, and environmental contexts, and its success depends on balancing these factors over generations. Flood management remains central to Venice's identity. Seasonal aqua alta events are reminders of the city's ongoing negotiation with water. Elevated walkways, movable barriers, and drainage systems continue to protect lives and property, while careful monitoring of tides and weather patterns informs both daily life and long-term planning. Venice's experience illustrates that living with water requires continuous adaptation, observation, and coordination. Floods are not merely hazards, they are part of the city's rhythm, shaping urban design, architecture, commerce, and social life. Venice shows that resilience is dynamic, requiring both technical ingenuity and cultural adaptation to sustain a city over centuries. The hidden systems of Venice, sewers, drainage channels, and foundations reveal a remarkable integration of engineering and urban life. These networks, often invisible to visitors, are essential to the city's continued existence. Engineers, carpenters, and residents understood that neglecting these hidden structures could compromise the entire urban fabric. Maintenance, observation, and careful management of these systems were as crucial as the construction of palaces and fortresses. Venice demonstrates that the longevity of urban settlements depends on both visible monuments and unseen infrastructure, with each component playing a vital role in sustaining life. Economic systems in Venice were also entwined with engineering. Canals enabled trade, palaces accommodated commerce, and markets adjusted to tidal cycles. The city's ability to integrate infrastructure, economy, and social life allowed it to thrive for centuries despite environmental challenges. Venice's history shows that economic resilience is inseparable from technical ingenuity and environmental adaptation. Commerce and engineering were mutually reinforcing. Canals facilitated trade, and trade supported the construction and maintenance of infrastructure. This synergy allowed Venice to flourish where many other settlements would have faltered. Modern Venice is a reminder of the fragility of human achievement. Climate change, rising seas, and tourism pressure test the city's systems, but centuries of knowledge, engineering, and communal effort provide a foundation for adaptation. Venice teaches that resilience is not a static state, but an ongoing process of observation, learning, and adjustment. Engineers, planners, and residents must continue to innovate, just as their ancestors did, ensuring that the city can endure for future generations. Venice embodies the principle that human ingenuity is most effective when combined with respect for natural forces, continuous learning, and collaborative action. The city's social and cultural legacy is intertwined with its engineering achievements. Festivals, daily routines, and civic life all reflect an understanding of Venice's unique environment. Residents have historically adapted their behavior, homes, and commerce to the rhythms of tides, floods, and canal flow. This cultural knowledge complements physical engineering, creating a holistic system in which people, structures, and water coexist. Venice's success demonstrates that sustainable urban life depends as much on social practices as on bricks, stone, and timber. Education and knowledge transfer have been essential to Venice's endurance. Generations of engineers, architects, and craftsmen passed down skills, observations, and techniques, ensuring that institutional memory remained strong. These lessons are now studied globally, informing modern projects in flood-prone and water-bound regions. Venice illustrates that engineering excellence is cumulative, requiring careful observation, experimentation, and intergenerational knowledge sharing. The city stands as a living classroom, offering lessons in resilience, adaptation, and sustainable urban design. Even in its vulnerability, Venice inspires reflection on human ambition, creativity, and the relationship with nature. A city built on mud, timber, and water has survived for more than a millennium, not through brute force, but through careful observation, ingenuity, and adaptability. Its palaces, canals, and hidden infrastructure illustrate a philosophy of engineering that integrates aesthetics, practicality, and environmental harmony. Venice teaches that survival in challenging conditions requires foresight, patience, and the willingness to learn from both successes and failures. Tourism, scholarship, and cultural preservation continue to ensure that Venice's lessons reach a global audience. Visitors walk along elevated walkways, admire palaces, and float along canals, often unaware of the complex engineering that sustains the city. Scholars analyze tidal patterns, foundation techniques, and hydraulic systems to apply insights elsewhere. Venice demonstrates that engineering is not merely a technical endeavor, but a cultural achievement, embedding knowledge, adaptation, and human creativity into the fabric of daily life. The legacy of Venice extends beyond its borders. Urban planners, architects, and engineers worldwide study its techniques for foundation stabilization, flood management, and water integration. Lessons learned from timber pile foundations, adaptive canal systems, and urban resilience inform projects from coastal cities to flood-prone settlements. Venice offers a blueprint for sustainable urban development in challenging environments, showing that careful integration of natural forces, human ingenuity, and cultural adaptation is essential for long-term survival. Ultimately, Venice embodies a rare synthesis of beauty, engineering, and human resilience. It is a city that rises above adversity, balancing the demands of water, commerce, and life itself. Its palaces, canals, and hidden systems are monuments not only to aesthetics but to foresight, observation, and technical skill. Venice endures because it understands that cities are not merely collections of buildings, but complex systems of people, infrastructure, and environment, each component carefully calibrated to work in harmony. In conclusion, the lessons of Venice are timeless. The city reminds us that human ingenuity can thrive in even the most challenging conditions when combined with observation, adaptation, and cultural cohesion. Foundations, canals, palaces, and hidden sewers reveal centuries of knowledge applied with precision and care. Floods, tides, and subsidence are challenges, but they are also opportunities for creativity, resilience, and problem-solving. Venice stands as a floating testament to the potential of human achievement when engineering, culture, and environmental awareness are fully integrated. Its legacy is not only historical, it is a guide for contemporary urban life, a living example of how to thrive in harmony with nature while building systems that endure across centuries. And so, as the gondolas drift quietly through the labyrinth of Venetian canals and the ancient palaces stand resilient against the ebb and flow of tides, we leave this city of ingenuity and wonder behind. For now, Venice has whispered its secrets of timber foundations, hidden waterways, and floating architecture, revealing how human determination and creativity can shape a city against the odds. As the soft ripple of water lulls the streets to rest and the distant bells fade into the night, remember that every stone, every canal, and every arch carries a story of patience, foresight, and quiet brilliance. So, traveler, close your eyes, let the gentle waves of the Venetian lagoon carry your thoughts, and drift into dreams where floating cities rise and fall, tides ebb and flow, and history breathes softly all around you. Sleep well, and may tomorrow bring curiosity as boundless as the waters of Venice. Good night, traveler, until we meet again.